We are quote-unquote live for 30andnerdy.com. I am Matt Sternad. You can reach me on Twitter at 30andnerdy, and across the internet from me is none other than...
I'm Scott William Hannon. You can find me on Twitter at SWHannon, Hannan, as well as on a handful of other social media sites. I haven't been too active on Twitter lately, though. So.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, whenever I see Scott has retweeted one of your tweets, I'm like, woohoo! Like, he is there. He does exist.
Yeah, I used to check Twitter compulsively, like several times a day, and sometimes I would just follow it for hours on end, depending on if there was an active conversation going. And I moved out to Santa Fe, and then I stopped checking Twitter.
You know what? It's because you have a real job now, and you're busy. And Twitter, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but social networking on the internet is not like a big part of what you do now, because you work at a school and whatnot. So.
Very true.
How do you like doing that, real quick, while I have you here? Gina keeps asking me. She keeps saying, like, does Scott like his job? Ask him. I'm like, I haven't asked him yet.
Yeah, I do. I guess for those who don't know, since that's probably most everybody, I got a job at St. John's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Went to graduate school here. I got my liberal arts and Eastern Classics degrees, and then back in December, as I was in San Francisco looking for work, they sent me the listing for a graduate admissions assistant job, where assistant is a little misleading because my position is to run and administer or administrate the summer programs at the Graduate Institute at the school. So I run the Film Institute and the Greek Language Institute.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then next summer we're going to add a Middle Eastern Institute for as an 8-week program.
To work with the Greek Language Institute, do you need to know Greek? Do you know Greek?
No, in fact, the Greek Language Institute is specifically for beginners.
Oh, okay. Wow, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, the idea is to try and learn ancient Greek in about 9 weeks.
Oh, cool. Wow, 9 weeks. Wow.
It's really intense, and of course you're not going to be exactly sight reading or anything like that by the end, but the last 4 weeks of class you'll be working hard on translating Homer, so the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and of course you won't be able to translate the whole thing. That would take months and possibly years, depending on your skill. But the idea is to just hammer through the basics, get you used to the language, and then start working with it rather than just playing with grammar.
Huh. Very cool. And in regards to the podcast, I guess for any listeners, I guess we should say that this is sort of going to be like an audio version of like a Now Loading. Scott and I generally just do the Now Loading article for 30 and Nerdy together. So we thought, like, hey, let's catch up and let's just talk about, like TV and movies and games and just like anything else going on in life inside and outside of the website and whatnot. So that's what you're listening to right now, and that's what this is going to be.
Yeah, I was absent for quite a while as I was in San Francisco looking for work and moving into Santa Fe. So it was difficult to participate and update and write enough. So we figured make a Now Loading podcast where we can sort of catch up on everything we've been doing for the past couple of months.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's get right into it then. We're going to start off with movies here, because why not? Movies. Yeah. And I thought it was so cool. Scott sent me over this list of, I guess I'm going to speak as if you're not here. I'm going to say, Scott makes this list. You make this list, correct me if I'm wrong, every single year, where you keep track of like everything you watch and listen to, and like the games you play and the books you read and stuff like that, right? And so the one that you sent me over was everything from 2014?
No, that's from 2015.
That list was everything you've just done so far?
Yeah.
Scott, I think that's more things than I get to in an entire year.
You know what? That's the reason I started this list, and I've only been doing it for the past 2 or 3 years or so.
Oh, wow.
And what I wanted to do is I wanted to figure out how many movies I watched in a year. That was where it began. And it started because when I was living in LA, and I had my buddy Dan had a Netflix subscription, 3 movies at a time, and we were always returning one each day. We had it set so it was a perfect loop, Yeah. And then we would go see double features at the New Beverly Cinema, and then we would see movies at the ArcLight, and then we would rent movies from the video store down the street. And it was a couple years later I realized that I had no idea how many movies it was I watched a year, and other people had like a good estimate as to how many they'd seen. And I felt like I had watched more than most people, but I had no idea what that number was. So I decided to start tracking it, and I did a pretty poor job in 2013 and 2014. I specifically did a bad job in 2013. 2014 is a much better representation of what I watched, and so this year I'm trying to be really diligent about it. And I realized I watch a lot of movies, even in slow years.
Yeah. Have you ever, just for fun, because not that you should ever put a price on anything like that, but just for the heck of it, especially when you've gone out to like the theater, been able to look back and been like, whoa, I spent $2,000 at the theater this year or anything like that? Have you tried looking at it from that angle?
I haven't, but it would be really easy to do that math because I know which ones I saw in the theater.
Oh, okay, yeah. I wonder if it'd be a proud number or if it'd be terrifying. You'd just be like, oh my God, my bank, my bank account.
I'm pretty sure it would be terrifying, but it's like sort of a combination between the two. It's in a proud way because I had just my DVD collection sent out from Illinois, where it was being stored in my parents' basement while I was looking for work, and I realized that even the small case of DVDs that I have, which has probably 50 movies in it, at $20 to $40 a disc, depending on the Criterion collection price, of course, that ends up to thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah.
And so, then I had the giant binder which has 400 discs in it, and I was like, I don't know how much to insure that for. When you ask UPS to insure it, I was like, that's worth $12,000.
Yeah.
Don't lose that box.
Yeah, because then even if they lost it and you had to replace it, like talk about a monumental task of just getting all of that back in one form or another.
Yeah, and I don't have too many special editions that can't be replaced, but there are a handful of movies on DVD that are harder and harder to find.
Yeah.
So, and also, I would never want to spend all of that money at once. Like, that's something I've accumulated over many years.
True. Yeah, it was a journey in and of itself.
Yeah.
Huh. So. Do you find, like, have you, recently, have you gone back to watch any of, like, your older DVDs? Are you struggling with, like, the audio and video quality of them versus, like, Blu-ray or just, like, HD downloads and things like that?
I definitely lean heavily towards the Blu-ray discs.
Yeah.
They are significantly better, and I just bought myself a new monitor, and they look really good on it. So it is harder to go back to the DVDs. But, of course, not everything's on Blu-ray, and it's not that DVDs look bad, it's just Blu-ray looks so much better by comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely can't go back to VHS. Like,
are you kidding?
It would have to be a really special situation where there's something really important only available on VHS. But I never liked VHS, even as a kid. I hated rewinding it. I hated the way the tape faded over time. I was always really frustrated with it. Of course, we had to use it, but the moment that DVD became affordable for me,
yeah.
I bought a DVD player the second I could.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the only reason to go back and watch anything on VHS is if you're going to watch The Ring and want, like, the full experience.
Yeah, or, like, your old home movies.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, VHS has no quality that is greater than DVD or Blu-ray or even Laserdisc to a point.
Yeah. So speaking of movies, one of the first things that caught my eye on the list you sent over was the film, The Right Stuff, which I guess you've actually also read the book, correct?
Yeah. I read the book and then I saw the movie.
Okay.
Like within a day.
Oh, wow. So then this is just off the top of my head, so I'm going to need you to correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure I will be. But this is about a group of, maybe they're astronauts, maybe they're just working for like the Air Force or something like that, but they're trying to break the sound barrier, essentially, right?
That's where the story begins.
Oh, wow, okay.
The story begins with the first rocket planes created by the U.S. Air Force after World War II. After World War II, of course, the United States and I think a couple other allied countries snatched up German scientists. And the German scientists, while they were working in Germany, had been developing rockets like the V series rockets, V2, I think, V1, V2.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the first machines ever built by humankind to dig deep into the atmosphere. And realizing that this was a potentially weaponizing force, that they were, of course, rockets meant to bomb the crap out of cities. The United States wanted their hands on it, and they wanted to do it better than anybody else. they also then turned some of these rockets into planes, which were launched from larger planes. And
Jeez.
yeah, it's crazy. They would get these little tiny rocket planes. They'd attach them to the bottom of a much larger plane. That larger plane would take off. Then they would drop the rocket plane. The pilot would hit the ignite button and go firing ahead. And more and more and more, the author of The Right Stuff, Dick Wolf, does a great job of explaining. It's not the pressure, but it's like the pride that these guys took in trying to break the sound barrier.
Yeah.
And it became harder and harder and harder, of course, for them to break the sound barrier the closer they got to it. And it sounds like all the pilots felt like they could do it, and that the engineering wasn't really a problem, but the engineers were like, we're pretty sure this can't be done. Which, of course, is not even remotely true, but it was the technology at the time was pushing limits that they didn't even know that they had. So it's really fascinating. But The Right Stuff discusses and takes you through the process where those pilots who were breaking the sound barrier, and the other thing that these rocket planes could do is they could go even higher up into the atmosphere. So they were also pushing the edge of what we understood to be the boundary for outer space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so really creepy stuff would happen as they got closer and closer to the top of the atmosphere or out of Earth's gravitational pull, or out of the significant gravitational pull, where it would they would lose their ability to control the plane because aerodynamics no longer work when the air gets thin enough. So he does a great job of describing these astronauts as these like athletes of piloting.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And as they become, or as they develop what they consider to be the right stuff, which is someone who is cool under pressure, doesn't complain, and doesn't freak out, and wants to be up in their jet or their rocket all day long, the United States decides that they're going to the moon, or that they have to beat the Soviets into outer space. And so these fighter pilots, these test pilots, become the first group of people to be put through the obnoxious and exhausting tests that NASA develops to go into the Gemini? Yeah. The Gemini capsules and go into outer space. So the story itself is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because he's mixing a great deal of public interest, political intrigue, and the brotherhood of the fighter pilots who have the quote-unquote right stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is the film good? Is it one of those cases where like obviously the book covers more ground and whatnot? Does the film itself do the same thing where it starts off about them breaking the sound barrier and then gets into the astronaut training and stuff like that, or is the film just like a slice of the book?
No, the film tries to cover as much of the book as possible, and in fact, the film covers a little bit more in some ways. The book does so much more completely. The film is kind of a mess.
Oh, really? That sucks. Because the reason just like back in the day, like years and years and years ago, my dad told me, like, oh, you gotta watch this movie, you'll love it. I don't know if it's something that he caught when it initially came out. Do you remember when the film was made? Was it like 70s or 80s or something like that? Or
80?
Okay.
80, 80 or 82, something like that.
And I love my father, and he has some great taste in films, but unfortunately I'm at that point where I realize we have two very different opinions on like what constitutes like a great film and stuff like that, and so unfortunately I've just kind of avoided it over the years. Not for that reason, but just, there's so many other things that I'd probably watched before I gave it a shot, which was like, so I was like, oh cool, I'll ask Scott like if I should watch it,
Yeah. I would recommend against it. I would suggest picking up the book. The book reads really quickly. It covers more information, and it doesn't screw around the way the movie does. I feel like the movie suffers from a lack of coherent direction.
Interesting.
Part of the problem with the book, and the book is far from flawless. Part of the problem with the book is that there's not a strict story here. Dick Wolf is just taking you through a period of time, and it starts with one guy and it ends with a handful of completely different people.
Ew.
So there's not a single character that you follow. There's not even really a single group of people you follow through the entire book. There are a couple of them, a couple of the fighter pilots, of course, who make it, but you don't start with those guys. You don't start with, Buzz Aldrin or Neil Armstrong when they were fighter pilots. You start with this guy, Chuck Yeager, who was, for a while, the king, so to speak, of the men with the right stuff. And he doesn't go or get conscripted or doesn't allow himself to be involved in becoming an astronaut, drops out right away and keeps working with the rocket planes. And he does a lot of amazing stuff with those rocket planes as these guys are being heralded as heroes for being fired up in a little can that they don't have any control over and then drop back into the ocean. So that's one of the conflicts that Dick Wolf does a really good job of creating, which is these fighter pilots thought that the astronauts are monkeys because they don't do anything. They don't fly that capsule. They get strapped in, they get shot into space, and they drop back down.
Right.
And in fact, the first test that they did with a living being was with a monkey. So, the other fighter pilots who thought that astronauts were stupid kept working with these rocket planes that kept getting higher and higher. They kept getting faster and faster, and they were pushing to make a space shuttle-like vehicle that would launch from the bottom of a plane and go into outer space and be able to come back in. But of course, their funding got rerouted into NASA a little bit, and also it became less and less of a big deal for these guys to be exploring the edge of space when you've got, these astronauts in lower orbit going around the planet. So it's an interesting conflict that he creates, but the movie fails to do that carefully, and it just smashes the two next to each other, and it runs headlong with this. It's not jingoism, but it's like over-enthusiasm for being one or the other. It sort of feels like a child wrote the script.
Does it become like purely about that race, kind of like America versus like Russia in that sense then?
No, not entirely. It's just so weird. It's like the movie's tone deaf. It doesn't realize that at times it's being overly goofy and silly. Like, honestly, there's a point in the movie where it introduces Jeff Goldblum and Harry Shearer as advisors, and they are this Laurel and Hardy-like comedy team who are, one, not in the book, two, really distracting from the movie, from like the primary story here. And you have no idea where they come from. They don't go anywhere, and they don't add to the movie. They just distract you with this really purple humor.
Yeah,
it's so bizarre. Yeah, and some of the acting is good, and most of it's really terrible. And it's not so much that it's bad acting as that it's misplaced. It feels like in a different movie, like the cinematic style doesn't match the performances in the movie or the story that they're trying to tell, which is why I say it's tone deaf, because I feel like it doesn't know how to play its instruments together.
Yeah.
So I would suggest reading the book, even though I find Dick Wolf's prose to be overly bombastic and sometimes exhausting, because he goes on and on and on about one small idea for pages at a time. You get way more information out of the book, and you can read it in an afternoon.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
So.
Well, awesome. So speaking of outer space, let's just move along here. I don't know if this next one here is something that you have too much to say about, but Jupiter Ascending, the latest film as of recording from the I always forget how you pronounce their last name, the Wachowski siblings. How do you pronounce it? Do you know how their last name is pronounced?
I just say Wachowski.
Oh, Wachowski. That's okay. I guess it's not even that hard.
I just refer to them as the Wachowskis now. I think it's easier.
Oh, so as opposed to saying brothers or siblings, it's them. It's those two.
Yeah, it's the Wachowskis.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a big enough name at this point.
Yeah, I didn't see this film.
Wise.
I think why is this? So you actually sat in a movie theater and watched this?
Mm-hmm. I did.
Did you see it
for the weekend?
Did you pay money to see this?
I did, full price. I saw it in 3D too.
Because based on the trailer, you thought it was going to be good, or?
I I went to see Jupiter Ascending because I went to go see Jupiter Ascending with the same this is sort of the same ad running through my head that everyone else said, which is that it's by the Wachowskis and it's original sci-fi.
Okay.
You know, it was nice to see something that wasn't going to be an adaptation of a comic book or a novel or, I don't know, something on the back of a Happy Meal. And it was the Wachowskis, and I keep wanting them to make a good movie, and their last movie, Cloud Atlas, I thought was mostly great.
I felt the same way about it.
Yeah, it's like this giant, overreaching movie that really dug into its own philosophy, and it span. You know, it's just one of those movies that's so impossibly complicated that once you know a little bit about how a film is made, you can't imagine being able to make a basic like buddy cop comedy, much less something as giant and intricate and convoluted as something like Cloud Atlas.
Right.
And so to be able to pull off something like that, I thought, okay, maybe they've got their groove back, and maybe Jupiter Ascending will actually be so easy for them that it'll be great. And there was nothing about the trailer that made me want to see it except Channing Tatum and Mila Kunis. Because I love Channing Tatum, and Mila Kunis is very attractive.
Fair enough. So you're basically saying, were there any redeeming qualities about it? Like anything that was great besides the vistas? Because I guess the special effects look really good, no?
Yeah, in fact, what I would have said is that it has the exact same qualities as Avatar, which is that the special effects are really good.
Yeah.
They're very consistent. They're very believable. At no point do you feel like you're watching something that's just a special effect, even though for the most part you are.
Gotcha. So I take it, plot, was the acting good at all, or?
You know, I don't want to bash the acting because you need good material to act with. Okay. And even someone like Sean Bean, who took every terrible cliche line that he was handed in Lord of the Rings and turned it into gold, he had worse material to work with here in Jupiter Ascending. Yeah, it's bad on just about every level except for its intentions. Gosh, where do you start? For starters, how about this? The movie is called Jupiter Ascending, and the main character is Jupiter, played by Mila Kunis.
Okay.
And it starts off sort of Cinderella-like. She has this pretty depressing life where all she does is work with her parents or her family in a cleaning service, and so she cleans toilets all day long, every day.
Yeah.
And the opening of the movie, in this case, is actually pretty good because it does this effective montage of her waking up at the absurd hour of the morning that she has to wake up, and then scrub and fight with her family, eat dinner, go to bed, wake up. And it does, it goes through that routine pretty effectively. And then it very quickly ruins it by introducing this brother that wants her to donate her eggs so that he can buy something. It's not quite clear if I remember correctly, until he actually is assured that she'll do it, and then he goes out and he buys a giant TV and a bunch of video games.
Yeah.
And that would be funny if there was some sort of insight into why he did it, but it didn't feel like he was deliberately trying to cheat her out of her money so he could get this cool stuff, and it didn't feel like he meant to get the whatever thing that he was going to get that would have gotten him his job or put him back on track. It felt like this out of the blue moment where, like, in editing they decided to use the silly take instead of the serious one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like ultimately in like the grand scheme of the film, she's approached because she's the heiress to Earth or something like that, and then ends up going on like a big epic sci-fi adventure.
Yeah. Sorry. So my point, I got distracted myself. So my point was that Jupiter is the main character of the story. She gets fired out into space. She's brought out there by Channing Tatum, who's a man-dog thing. And, yeah, she's the heiress to Earth, because Earth, just like in The Matrix, is basically just a harvest. It's just a giant aliens so that they can churn out humans, so they can chop them up and grind them into gruel, and they can turn it into something that's akin to an immortality potion.
Okay.
Eating humans apparently extends your life further. There's even an H.P. Lovecraft story that's like that. So it's an old idea that they put a sci-fi, veneer on.
Mhm.
And the second she gets into outer space, she trades her cleaner's clothing, her jeans and flannel shirt, in for a dress. So she basically turns into a Disney princess, and then doesn't do anything the entire movie except wait for Channing Tatum's dog man to rescue her. And I'm not really exaggerating there. You know, she, between cuts, decides to learn the entire legal code of whatever this bizarre monarchy is that exists in outer space. Doesn't have any significant effect on the plot except for at the end of a Terry Gilliam-inspired montage that just rests heavily on being partially silly and running through what would be like the worst day at a space DMV possible. But otherwise, she just wears different dresses, kind of argues with her space brothers, and waits for Channing Tatum to take care of all the violence and all the major plot points. It was pretty obnoxious.
Yeah, it sounds kind of insulting, like the role itself, like compared to what she's capable of as an actress and stuff like that, and somebody who can carry the weight of certain films on her shoulders and stuff like that. It sounds like she was really underutilized.
Yeah, especially if you compare it to say something like Black Swan.
I've never seen that film. That is high up on my list of films that I want to watch.
Yeah, I didn't like Black Swan too much, but there were things about it that I did like, and her performance is one of them.
It's her and Natalie Portman, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both really good.
Gotcha. What was I going to say? Oh, because you mentioned Terry, what's his last name? Gilliam?
Terry Gilliam.
Have you seen, and correct me if I'm wrong on the fact that he directed this, what is his latest film? The Zero Theorem? Is that what it's called?
I think so.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it came out stateside yet, but I've been meaning to check it out. I think it had like a UK release and like some other territories and stuff like that.
Yeah, it had a really bad distribution schedule.
I know, it's all his films end up like that though, don't they? Where
he has the worst luck in
so niche. You don't like him at all?
No, I think he has the worst luck.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been meaning to check that out. Oh, you want to move along to Godzilla, or you have anything left to say about Jupiter Ascending, other than you're saying don't really worry about it, don't check it out?
Don't see it. Just don't see Jupiter Ascending. It's a total waste of your time. I should mention, everybody has said something about this, so I guess I'll throw in my 2 cents here. There's one of Jupiter's brothers is played by Eddie Redmayne, and it feels like Eddie Redmayne was dropped out of some other movie. He gives a performance that tips the scale on good taste in the weirdest direction possible. He is either whispering as though he were Voldemort, or he's screaming as though he were some. Gosh, I don't know. I don't even understand what justifies that sort of screaming. But it's like he were leading a charge against orcs or Uruk-hai.
Yeah.
There was a point in the movie where he was whispering, and it's this drawn out sort of, I want you to think.
That was a good impression. I mean, I don't know, but just like in general.
Yeah, it's terrible. And there was one point in the movie where I wanted to stand up, and I honestly almost did this, stand up and just yell at the screen, speak up.
Oh, okay.
It was so low that it was difficult to hear, and I'm in a movie theater where everything is super loud. Aside from that being bad directing, it's clearly a bad choice to to go. It's one thing to ham it up for a silly movie like Gregory Rush does in the Pirates movies, where he just nails Barbossa by being big and bombastic and silly. It's another thing to forget that you're supposed to be performing a character instead of just picking up whatever random inspiration you feel like channeling. It's really bad. And I should also mention, I rewatched the Matrix lobby scene this morning, just sort of at random, and it's like they're made by 2 completely different sets of filmmakers.
Really? Yeah.
One of them is really stylized, with a great sense of space and timing, and the action in Jupiter Ascending looks like it was made by something that Michael Bay tossed out at the editing room floor.
Yeah.
They don't have any similarities at all. It was really disappointing.
Do you just get to that point where maybe a quarter of the way into the film, or at whatever point it is, that you realize that the whole movie's just garbage, but you've got to sit there and sit through it if you want to get your money's worth? You just roll your eyes the whole time, or take deep
Yeah.
breaths, or like how do you handle that?
Well, usually I stick around for some reason. It's usually pretty tolerable, even if it's bad.
Yeah.
There are very few movies that I walk out of, but I finished my popcorn about 20 minutes into Jupiter Ascending,
Yeah.
and I really debated leaving because I was done with my popcorn.
That's so funny. That's how I get too. Like I don't. There might have been one instance where I've ever walked out of a film, and I can't remember exactly when it was. I think I would have been probably in my low 20s or something like that. But I'm gonna kind of segue us here into Godzilla, the Godzilla remake.
Yeah.
That's how I felt about that film. Like I found very few redeeming qualities.
The new one?
Yeah, I hated it, and it was one of those movies where I was sitting there and I was rolling my eyes the whole time, and I wasn't like literally like checking my watch, but I was kind of hoping like over and over and over again that like things would wrap up or speed up, or I was just started thinking about other things while I was watching it, because we went to go see it, and the night before we watched the original Japanese black and white film and whatnot, and I don't know, I felt sad that the original, not even in some like film snobby kind of way, it was just like it was better, and I was engaged with it and I enjoyed it. And for some reason, it's hard for me to get into older movies just because of their pacing and stuff like that. And I'm not one of those people that needs to be, like bombarded to Michael Bay levels with like explosions and things like that with films. Not whatsoever, but I just found it really endearing and really intelligent. And the new movie was just so... I didn't like the main character. I didn't like the lack of Godzilla in it. There were just so many things wrong with it, and that's why I never talked to you about it. I wasn't sure how you felt about it.
Sure. Well, let me ask, what did you like about the original Godzilla? Because I haven't seen that, but I have been told, like you said, that it's a more intelligent movie, and I understand that there's a pretty strong bit of subtext in there about Japan and nuclear war, and Godzilla
totally.
being the result of nuclear power and so forth, or not just power, but weapons and whatnot. And that's the only one of the series that really embraces that theme in an intelligent and cinematic way.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that were true, that doesn't necessarily make it an entertaining movie, and so many people have found it entertaining. So what works for you in the original Godzilla?
I think like you're saying, yeah, there's all the subtext about like nuclear war and things like that. It's all in there, and that's one of the things that definitely carries some weight with the film. But it was just one of those movies where I was watching it, and there was a part of my brain that was just enjoying it and kind of exploring it for like the piece of film that it was, but then there was that other part of me that was constantly blown away by the special effects and everything that they achieved for the time, especially towards like the last 3/4 of the film or so, when he finally like goes on the rampage through the city and stuff like that, and just seeing all the models that they built for the subways and the cars and stuff like that, and realizing it was a guy in a rubber suit, and it just like the production value of it and stuff like that, just it blew me away despite how old it was. And I just felt like how cool it must have been to see that film for the first time when it came out, and it would have been like this mind-blowing experience, as I bet it was for so many people. And I just feel like it still works, and because it still worked and that the story was still there like all these years later, I felt like there was a certain charm to it, and I really appreciated the staying power that I felt like it had. And so then, like, literally watching that evening, and then the next day going to see the new one, it felt like the new one to me was kind of like this embodiment of everything that's wrong with quote unquote like Hollywood movies nowadays. And just, I don't know, the way, you know what, I appreciate everything they tried to do with the new Godzilla. I appreciate that they tried to hide the monster and not make it like super in your face. I don't know if it was the military aspect, that it was so, kind of like the Band of Brothers approach to it or whatnot, but there was something about it that just did not grip me whatsoever.
Yeah, one thing I would, actually, you touched on a lot of really interesting topics. The first one I'm going to touch on is the Spielberg approach to monster movies.
Yeah.
Which became famous in Jaws, where he doesn't show the shark for the first hour of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That has become almost a rule for people who are trying to make a quote-unquote artistic monster movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's another rule in like the canon of film rules or literature rules, whatnot, that gets not just overused, or maybe not even overused, but overappreciated or misused.
Mm-hmm.
I love The Host, and The Host doesn't waste any time showing you the monster.
That's a great film. Yeah, I did love that film too.
And so it's really misguided to think, I'm going to make an artistic monster movie, so I won't show the monster for the first hour.
Mm-hmm.
That's irrelevant, you know? It should be, does the movie need to show the monster? Do we need to see this thing right up and close? Or right up in your face and early in the movie. And in The Host, not only does it introduce the monster early, but it shows you the monster in bright daylight in a continuous take.
Yeah.
For, like, I think it's a 2 or 3 minute long shot. And it's incredible. But The Host is not just a monster movie with cool special effects. In fact, the special effects in The Host are questionable.
Yeah, they're not that great.
Yeah, they lack polish.
Yeah, definitely.
But they work, and what works to support those is the strong family story that is throughout the entire movie. Now, I'm guessing here that the original Godzilla has a stronger story than, say, the newer Godzilla. And that, I feel like, is going to be the big difference, because even though the special effects in the new Godzilla I thought were pretty great, and I even liked the action scenes once we got to them. And I was thinking to myself, as I watched it at home, that I would have loved to see it in theaters because it would have made a great visual spectacle.
Okay, yeah.
But it didn't bother me that I didn't care about the main character and that I wasn't too caught up in the story or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if it would have really bothered me if I had to look at that lack of story in theaters.
Yeah. It was like in theaters for me, it felt like the lack of story combined with the lack of monster. Like I probably, like you were saying, in a way, touching on is that I would have enjoyed the movie more, seeing it in the theater with a lot more big monster battles and stuff like that, because at least I would have been, like stimulated on that level. But it was like it had neither. It had no characters I did not care about, and it couldn't engage, couldn't relate to, whatever, etc. But then it also didn't have a lot of like the crazy monster stuff. So I felt like I wasn't getting anything out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if there's something to be said for, if you're going to make a giant monster movie, you have to have, and you're not going to show the monster for an hour, you have to have a giant story ahead of time.
Yeah,
good. The rest of it.
And it wasn't.
Your story has to be on par with the monster, otherwise it doesn't justify the monster.
Yeah, and I haven't watched I saw The Host for the first time years and years ago, but I remember that was one of the things I did like about it, was that the characters, isn't there like it's like a brother or a grandpa, and then there's like the sister or something like that. I just remember it has this cool ensemble cast, and like everybody's trying to deal with the monster and figure out what's going on and stuff like that. I just remember really enjoying the characters. Like you said, the special effects weren't that great, the monster was cool and stuff like that, but man, those characters grow on you, and you're just rooting for them by the end of the movie, Yeah,
they have a tangible struggle that's set against this giant monster story.
Yeah.
The main character is a slob, like a slob. Father to this little girl. He's got a brother who is a revolutionary who's now like an accountant, and then you've got the sister who is an Olympic grade archer.
That's right. Okay.
Comes in second or something, Yeah.
And
so she's got her shame, the brother's got his shame, he's got his shame, and then the grandpa's trying to hold them all together.
Right.
And then the daughter is trying to grow up amongst it. And so everybody's got their conflict, everybody has their story, they all come together and weave and interweave throughout the course of the entire movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, the action's great, the monsters, whatever, the special effects aren't that great, but the scenes that involve it are spectacular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was interesting too was that so we saw Godzilla with our whole family, and Gina and I walking out of the theater were the two people out of it. Was myself, Gina, my dad, my sister, and my sister's boyfriend. And Gina and I were just kind of like, that movie was not good. And my dad was like, what do you mean? I thought it was great. And my sister and her boyfriend were kind of like right in between, like it was okay. Point being that my dad finally, after letting it sink in for a while, like came to us like a week later and was like, okay, I guess it wasn't that great, because I guess he that night, in his confusion, went and watched the Godzilla 2000 movie, and he was like, well, at least that movie was funny, like recognized for everything that was horrible about it, but said, yeah, it might actually be more entertaining. And then like a week or two later, Gina and she had never seen Cloverfield, which I don't know where you stand on that film. I like it. I think it's great.
I like it.
And I introduced her to that for the first time, and she was just kind of like, wow, like everything, emotionally and spectacle-wise that she thought Godzilla was going to be, she thought was in Cloverfield. It was like a monster movie done right.
Totally.
Despite some of the questionable cast and, the way it's filmed and stuff like that, but there's still, I don't know.
Yeah, no, Cloverfield is a solid picture. I struggle with the ending a little bit, but otherwise it's great. Yeah, I have a really hard time believing that they survived the helicopter crash. I can suspend my disbelief quite a bit, but like helicopter crashes are notorious for just killing everybody involved.
Oh, I believe it.
And the movie goes on just a little bit too long, and I didn't think it needed the helicopter crash, but whatever. I mean, it's fine. Yeah. I liked the new Godzilla more than I expected. And I came away with a pretty positive impression of it, but I agree with everything you're saying. I didn't care about the main character. I couldn't tell you what happened in the story. And for as much as I love Bryan Cranston, I don't know why he was in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Or Ken Watanabe. I don't know why.
I watched a video on YouTube. I don't know if I linked it in one of our articles that we were doing. It was like the Everything Wrong with Godzilla, or no, it was like the Honest Trailers, and it said something like Ken Watanabe was in the movie for one reason, and it's like when he finally says Godzilla's name, it's just like super dramatic. I love him as an actor too, but yeah, it was like he was in that movie to say that line,
Now here's a question: did you see Gareth Edwards' previous film Monsters?
No, but I can picture the box art for it. Is it like two people walking around in sort of like a decimated city, post-apocalyptic kind of thing?
No, it's a monster movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a really, really bad, like obvious allegory for immigration, because it's this daughter of some rich guy, and I think he's a photographer. And through whatever miracle of plotting, he has to escort her from Mexico across the border into the United States. Meanwhile, there are these giant alien creatures that have not taken over Mexico, but they've crash landed there, sort of like in District 9, and now they're trying to quarantine them in different parts of Mexico, and he has to go through the monster-infected area because he can't get through the regular routes because plot. And I found it unwatchable.
Okay.
I hated that movie because it was such an obvious allegory. It was done very inelegantly.
Okay.
It was just plainly obvious, and then at the end of the movie, he states it almost exactly. It's like, man, these monsters, they're more like us than I think, or something like that. It's so obvious, and it was boringly shot and terribly acted. It was like in every way it was a bad movie. I saw it when I was in Albuquerque years ago, and my friend and I sat in the front row mocking the movie start to finish, and we kept thinking we were going to get kicked out because I think everybody else in the theater really liked it. So I was curious to know, because Gareth Edwards is the guy who is the director, and then he directed the new Godzilla, and they're nothing alike except that the story's bad. But the monsters in Godzilla, and whatever Mothra-like character it was. What was the other character? What was the other?
Yeah, let's just call it Mothra. We know it wasn't. No, I don't know. Yeah, I know what you mean though. The flying ones, the big black bug-looking ones, the beetle. Yeah. I don't know.
They were cool.
Yeah.
Whereas in Monsters, like those creatures, they looked sort of like the tripods from War of the Worlds. From Spielberg's War of the Worlds. It was really bizarre. And, in the end, Monsters was just trying to say, oh, they're not really monsters after all. They're just here to mate.
Right.
And that was kind of what happened in the new Godzilla, too, wasn't it? That the flying bugs were trying to mate, and then Godzilla got in their way?
Yeah, they're just trying to make sweet love, and Godzilla wasn't having any of it.
Yeah, he cock-blocked them.
Yeah. Godzilla's a total cockblock. What the heck, Godzilla?
So, yeah, I found that to be a strange parallel, because I hated it in Monsters, but I feel like it kind of works in the new Godzilla. It's not to say that it's brilliant by any means, but
right.
I didn't hate it the way I did in Monsters. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well,
yeah.
So, yeah, I guess moving on from that, and also, yes, definitely watch the original. I'm curious to, even if you just shoot me an email, let me know what you thought of it,
Sure.
when you get around to it. I know you have a eternally long list too, I'm sure. These next three I feel like we can kind of group together, and only because of their similar subject matter. We've got did you pronounce it Automata or Automata?
I pronounce it Automata, but it probably could be Automata.
Automata? Okay, so we got Automata, Chappie, which just came out in theaters, and then Ex Machina from Alex Garland,
Yeah.
Which is actually his directorial debut. And all three of these are sort of dealing with like artificial intelligence and just kind of exploring just different themes, I guess, within like the sci-fi genre, all having to do with like AI and robots and things like that. And I've never seen Automata. I did see Chappie. We didn't like it. And then I haven't seen Ex Machina, but I've read online that it's actually really, really great. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on like Automata, because you've actually seen it. That's with Antonio Banderas, right?
Yeah. Automata is like another incarnation of iRobot.
Oh, okay.
So it's about these androids who have two rules, which is they can't cause harm and they can't self-modify. And of course, the first thing that happens in the movie is that this one guy catches an android. I think they call them servants or something like that. They're basically just housemaids, like in Bicentennial Man. And so this cop, and this is what I mean. The movie immediately disinterested me. Like it immediately put us on bad terms. It introduces this character who looks like a stupid 80s villain. He's got his hair slicked back. He has his aviator sunglasses on. He's wearing like a translucent raincoat. He's got this permanent semi-scowl and a semi-beard, and he's driving around in his cruiser, and then goes into an alley. It reminds me a lot of Minority Report. And he hops out of his car. He's carrying a shotgun, and then he goes over to this little hut where you hear all these sounds, like electronic sounds, and there's a light, and he pulls this cover of the little hut off, and there's an android there, and it's clearly adjusting itself. It's making modifications to its own body. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't really react. So we've got this perfectly stoic, horrible-looking character, no story, just a lot of attitude, and instead of using the shotgun that he's carrying, he then takes out a gun and shoots the android in the head. The android wasn't trying to fight him. In fact, it was kind of begging for its life.
He sounds as one-dimensional as Hugh Jackman's character in Chappie. Did you end up seeing Chappie, by the way? Or
no. Way too many sources hated that movie. I was so excited. I was telling people at work that I was going to see Chappie that night. I was singing a song with its title in place of a couple other words. And then I heard your review. I heard your response. I think you put it up on Facebook.
The podcast one, or just like the general?
I think it was just your general post.
Oh, okay, gotcha, yeah.
So disappointed. And then I read Michael Phillips' review from the Chicago Tribune, and then I read the review from RogerEbert.com, and everybody, like Michael Phillips gave it 0, Roger Ebert gave it half, and you didn't have anything nice to say about it, so I decided not to go into Chappie.
Okay, you saved yourself some money.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's the same sort of character, where he's just one-dimensional, without motivation except to be in the way of the rest of the story.
Oh man, yeah, it's so dumb. Jackman's character is just a pile of garbage in that film. Like, ugh.
It's so frustrating. Like, sci-fi has so much potential to be fascinating cinema because there is so much about it that is strongly visual, and it just works so well. If you watch old Star Trek episodes, you watch newer Star Trek episodes, like, the original series and The Next Generation just nail it. Even if you watch something like Black Mirror. That British show.
I know. I keep wanting to check it out because you told me that it was great and it was good, and we did you plugged it and now loading, and I just from everywhere I keep hearing like each episode is its own twisted tale of awesomeness.
It's like the Twilight Zone, except it's 40 minutes long and 40 to 50 minutes long, and it's really intense. And each one of them introduces a piece of technology that in some way calls into question or calls into question the practice of our humanity, and it's brilliant. And each one of these movies that we're talking about here, Automata and Chappie, and possibly Ex Machina. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but I think the idea is there. When you're presented with a robot or an android that is supposed to emulate humanity, and then begins to emulate it beyond what you told it could be, there is so much potential there to really to create an insightful commentary on who we think we are and what we think our potential is.
Yeah.
And it's tough to write that, but I don't know that it's worth churning out something that's so soulless and so empty.
Yeah.
I mean, Automata is on top of everything else a boring movie. There's actually a point where the androids are dragging Antonio Banderas on a sled through the desert for like 20 minutes. It's like this giant chunk in the middle of the movie, and I'm thinking, isn't this supposed to be about the future and robots?
Yeah.
Why are we just watching somebody get pulled along in the desert? It was pretty disappointing.
Have you seen any of the trailers for Ex Machina, or have you read up on it at all?
Yeah, I've seen the trailer a couple of times actually, and I can barely remember anything about it, but I'm deliberately pushing it out of my brain because I do want to see it.
Okay. I won't give you a refresher course on it though, but if you end up seeing it or anything like that, let me know. I'm going to try to see it also. I feel like I keep thinking I've missed its release date out here.
I know, me too.
But I don't. I want to say it might be coming out in April or May actually.
I'll check as we're talking here. Okay. But it's written by Alex Garland, and you asked if I liked Alex Garland.
He wrote it and he directed this one also. Like I said, it's his directorial debut. I got to listen to a podcast interview with him on it also, and one of the reasons why I'm really excited for it is it seems like he took this very mature and slow and deliberate approach to the film. Like, it's not an action movie. It sounds incredibly intellectual from both like a direction and like writing standpoint and whatnot. And one of the things that he was saying that he realized from the get-go in regards to like the story and this production was that if his actors were not perfect for their roles and just kind of like, just very, very capable actors and whatnot, that he knew the whole movie wasn't going to work and that basically the film would have fallen apart before it ever began. And it sounds like he made some really good casting decisions and whatnot, and just, like I said, approached this from like a very mature standpoint. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to see it.
Okay, and now let me just do a quick quiz here for you. What else has he written?
He wrote The Beach. He wrote Sunshine. He wrote 28 Days Later. And The Beach was a book before it was Danny Boyle's screenplay. But yeah, Danny Boyle's directed a lot of the stuff that he's written as far as like his screenplays and stuff like that have gone. Anyways, yeah. Do you like him or?
I guess I have to say no.
Okay.
But what intrigues me is that I think it was 80 to 90% of Sunshine was brilliant and was exactly the movie I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Then when it introduces the monster supernatural stuff at the end,
yeah,
I feel like that comes out of left field. I don't really understand the way that it interacts with the rest of the story, except that it feels like he suddenly wanted to pontificate on God and existence, and he decided to just throw a monster who was screaming that stuff at us at the end of the movie. And one, I think, if you want to write an effective story, you weave that throughout the rest of the narrative. And two, it was so antithetical to the tone and the pace and the actual conflict, the character conflict. It really bothers me.
Yeah, it's almost like they were trying to pull a Shyamalan-esque, plot twist and all of a sudden have people who like going to see sci-fi movies find themselves sitting in the midst of a horror movie and being like, but I do like that film, but I understand all these things, like all the ways in which that does not work and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to say that despite this ending that really bothers me, mm-hmm. the majority of Sunshine is fantastic.
Yeah,
I love it. I couldn't do 28 Days Later. I've seen it a couple of times. I don't really like zombie movies in the first place, and
okay.
28 Days Later just didn't do anything for me. But here's what interests me. He also wrote Enslaved: Odyssey to the West, the video game.
Oh yeah, that's right. The it's not Team Ninja Theory game.
Yeah. In that game, I hated the gameplay, but I was loving the story.
Yeah. You know what? There was only one thing that took me out of that game, and that was, do you remember at a certain point when you explore, you find these like photographs, and like the photographs are of what's his name, who does all like the motion capture and did it for the main character.
Oh.
He did. No, wait, we're gonna do this. We're gonna get this. He did in the new Planet of the Apes movies. He did the motion capture for Caesar, the main guy. I've never seen those. Huh? Oh yeah, Andy Serkis. Yeah. Okay, and so you're questing around in this world, and you're finding like the photographs of like the remnants of society, and it's always this picture of like a whoever it was supposed to be in the game. But I always looked at the picture of the character, and I'm like, oh, that's Andy Serkis in real life, who does the motion capture for this main character I'm playing in this game, and it took me out every single time. I was like, really, you guys couldn't have found a different actor to take pictures of?
or just drew a picture.
Yeah.
Like the rest of the game is CG.
Right. So yeah, it was weird. It was one of those choices that they made that, granted, would not take everybody out because not everybody would know who Andy Serkis was or what he looks like in real life. But like for me, unfortunately, it did, and I felt like a victim.
Yeah. How bizarre.
But yeah, okay. So wait, so you didn't like the gameplay in that game, but you liked the story and everything?
I was enjoying the story. I wanted to keep playing it just for the sake of the story. I didn't end up finishing with this because I was borrowing somebody else's copy, and then I moved and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Just got in the way. Cool. Was there anything else in movies that you want to discuss? That was.
No, you said Automata wasn't good. I said Chappie wasn't good, and we're both willing to give Ex Machina a shot.
I think you're right. Let's swing on over to television then. The first one we've got up on our list here is Archer.
Yeah, I don't have too much to. Are you all the way caught up with it, or?
I'm all the way caught up with what Netflix offers.
Okay, so I'm just behind you in that we're, I don't know, a handful of episodes into what Netflix has to offer. I think I wrote here that it's the 4th season. It's whatever season Archer Vice is. I think it's the 4th season. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm surprised that you, obviously if you're still watching it, you enjoyed the series, correct?
Yeah, in fact, I've gone through it twice.
Oh, wow, that's so cool. I think it's cool that you like it only because, I don't know, I wasn't sure if you would have or what. It's one of those shows that, like, admittedly, like, Gina absolutely, like, she loves it, like, out of her mind loves it. And I'm like, I think it's really good. I really, really like it. Whereas she could binge watch it, but I feel like every once in a while I need a breather, like, from that breed of, like, comedy and action and stuff like that. It's one of those shows that I don't really laugh out loud at, but I chuckle a lot because it's just so... It's so profane and perverse and stuff like that, But it's great. The writing's fantastic. The voice acting's good. Aisha Tyler and what's his name? Who's Archer? Benjamin, right?
H. John
Benjamin. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's just like, I don't know. Everything about the cast in that show is just fantastic. It's perfect.
Yeah. It's a show that's firing on all cylinders, to use a really lame metaphor. It's the writing is really, really tight.
Mm-hmm.
And for a show that seems to waste a lot of time, if you were to count up the number of plot points and plot twists in any given episode, you'd use your entire hand or maybe two, depending, of course, on the episode.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you wanted to try and track the number of jokes or the number of in-jokes that they create throughout the course of an episode or the course of a season, like the whole thing is woven together really well. And I know exactly what you mean by needing a breather, because even though I do binge watch it, I get through like 3 episodes and then I go, I don't really recall the difference between any of these episodes. But it's been consistently entertaining throughout. And something that I find really interesting is just how effective it is as a narrative, because so many there's an entire spy movie in each episode.
Yes.
They're only 22 minutes long. And then I think of stuff like, Godzilla. Like, what happened throughout the course of that movie? That's an hour and a half to 2 hours long. Or actually, no, that one was 2.5 hours, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And you think, if you can put this much material into such a short show, like, what are we really getting out of our feature-length films? And it starts to bug me after a while, but it really, in this case, it just makes me appreciate Archer all the more, because on top of being a really tightly woven narrative, it's an amazing genre spoof. It's one of those genre spoofs like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz that almost does the spoof better than the material they're mocking.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, because we just turned the AC on in here because it was getting really hot in here. Can you hear it?
Yeah. I can't, no.
Okay, hopefully it doesn't come in. I might be able to cut a little bit of it out if I have to, but I was just making sure.
Okay, sounds fine.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I've kind of piggybacking what you were saying about like films versus television and stuff like that. I've gotten to the point where, and Chappie was kind of a tipping point for me, where it's almost like I'm afraid to go to the theater and invest not really the money, but kind of like wasting my time more than anything.
Yeah.
The more extreme version of it in regards to gaming, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, is kind of being afraid to drop $60 on a brand new video game and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And whereas TV, though, especially with things like Hulu and Netflix, or heck, if you're just paying for cable, the amount of programming that you get for X amount of dollars, per month and stuff like that, it's just glorious how you can find those shows that you're able to fall in love with, and then you're provided with episode after episode after episode of like something really, really great that you love, and Archer's a prime example of that.
Yeah, there's a new article in Cracked. I think it came out over the weekend. It's called 5 Advantages Movies Always Had Over TV, and then in parentheticals it says that TV stole away. And it's really interesting to think of the shift that's taken place over the past 15 or so years between television and the theater and cinema. Mm-hmm. It used to be that the intelligent crowd would go to see movies, and the stupid crowd, quote unquote, would watch TV shows. And of course, there was always a little bit of spillover on the other side, but
right.
The reputation was that movies were smarter than television. And I think it happened somewhere around The Sopranos, where TV started to get a lot smarter. That's not to say that stuff like I've even mentioned before in this episode, Star Trek had some really intelligent television, even if it was low budget and kind of hokey.
Uh-huh.
Ditto the X-Files in terms of sci-fi. There are plenty of other good shows before The Sopranos, but I think The Sopranos set in motion like this bizarre competition amongst other TV producers to create television that was as good, if not better, than any feature-length movie you could go see at any random point in the year. Whereas cinema has been slowly declining in terms of intelligence, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Some would say since the blockbuster, like Star Wars and Jaws, I'm more convinced by the argument that it starts around Top Gun, where they really start to exploit an age group for the summer movies.
That's what it feels like to me, yeah. You're saying, especially in regards to the summer movies. Granted, I've said time and time again, I absolutely love the Marvel movies and stuff like that, for as ridiculous and mindless as they can be in like the action movie sense. I just grew up with those characters and loved them. But outside of that, it feels like films aren't made for me anymore. Like I watch trailers and I just like roll my eyes, and it does. Maybe it's because we're over 30 now or something like that, and like those types of films are made for like teenagers and like people in their low to mid 20s and stuff like that. But I feel like they're not even trying to talk to me anymore.
Yeah, and it's not that there's ever been a shortage of stupid movies. Mr. Science Theater has proven that there were terrible movies that were black and white. So it's not that bad cinema hasn't existed beforehand. But there's definitely a change in the market and in the trend. And the superhero movies have a lot to do with it, because another point that this Correct article brings up was that if you sign up to do a superhero movie, you don't sign up to do one movie anymore. You're signed up for 10 years. And it's one of the reasons that John Hamm won't do a superhero role. He keeps getting offered superhero roles, but he refuses to do it. He's like, because I'm not gonna sign some draconian contract and have to do these torturous movies over and over again. And there are a couple other points in this article where they talk about the process of making a superhero movie involves so much green screen and so many special effects that you don't know what you're making anymore. You're just told to stand in one place and do an act, and then they say action cut, and then it's over. Whereas with a show something like True Detective or Breaking Bad, there are very few special effects, and it's a short run, and it's a very specific show, very specific story with strong characters and a specific arc over the course of those episodes. And in something like True Detective, you only sign up for 8 episodes. So you get an 8-hour movie, really short shooting schedule, and a really gritty, hands-on script that a good actor can dig into.
Yeah, I want to thank you for segueing us there. That's actually next on our list, as you're no doubt aware. I haven't watched that show, and I hear nothing but just raving reviews about it from start to finish. And I was just wondering, just your thoughts on it, and is it that good? And should it go to the top of the list of yes, you need to watch this kind of material?
You need to watch this.
Okay, I figured.
I mean, yeah, but it's always worth asking that question. You know, I go to see movies all the time because, there's just an overwhelming approval for a particular movie, and then I walk out of it and I go, "What the hell was everybody thinking?" The most recent example for me is What We Do in the Shadows, which is a New Zealand picture made by the guys who did Flight of the Conchords. And I love Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah, me too. It's a great show.
And this movie was unwatchably boring. It was a horrible experience, and it ruined my day. I was supposed to go out to eat afterwards, and I had to go straight home because I was so angry and so upset by how bad this movie was.
You curl up in your little ball and just rock yourself to sleep.
I was just so disappointed. It's like they took everything that was great about Flight of the Conchords and they just threw it to the side, and all they did is keep the visual style. It was an acting style, that sort of mumblecore thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas True Detective is a movie that was super hyped, and this was just after the Matthew McConaughey had really gotten into motion, and I was only partially convinced by it. I forget which.
The Matthew McConaughey. I believe it based on how that. Wow.
It's funny. It's really funny because he's never really been bad, but he's done a lot of stupid movies.
Yeah.
And so it was just a bunch of stuff that I didn't want to see. Everything he did with Kate Hudson, I didn't ever care to watch. I didn't really care about his John Grisham-esque thrillers. I'm not a Linklater fan, so I didn't see the movies he did with Linklater.
He always had a certain charisma about him, though.
Yeah, a certain charisma, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also that thick Southern accent is a turnoff for a lot of people. It doesn't really bother me, but it's noticeable, and so sometimes it's hard to get good roles when you have such a unique identity like that.
Yeah.
And so I forget what it was that convinced me that I should at least give True Detective a shot. But honestly, the first couple scenes of True Detective are going to convince you that Matthew McConaughey is a tremendous performer.
Okay.
And it'll also convince you that the material at hand is deep and dark. I don't know how much I should go into it because it's a murder mystery.
Okay.
That veers really far away from the murder mystery.
Okay.
About halfway through, and eventually, I've watched it twice now. And the first time, it kind of bugged me that it got so far away from the murder mystery because I love murder mysteries.
Right.
But I was enjoying everything else so much that I didn't really care. The dialogue is, at times it feels like it was written by a philosophy student, but by a good philosophy student, by somebody who really wants to explore the differences between these two characters. One's played by Woody Harrelson named Hart, and then Matthew McConaughey plays Cole. And Hart is your semi-typical cop in Louisiana with a family and kids, and he's a Christian, and he's a questionably decent cop. Whereas Matthew McConaughey is an excellent cop. He has a questionable past and is a hardcore atheist.
Oh, wow.
And so you put them in the same car with each other, and you get a pretty typical-sounding buddy cop adventure, but it is so dark, and it is so on point with what it's trying to explore in terms of what... It's not even asking really what creates a person who commits these sorts of murders, and I won't go into it too much, but what it does is it creates a tone that out of the lower Louisiana state that just makes it feel like everything is just bubbling up out of the same muck. And gosh, it's so gritty and tangible. I really don't know how to... Gosh, I was really trying to find something more provocative to say about the show, but it pits the characters against each other so strongly without being just the two fighting all the time.
Right.
And it... Oh, goodness. how do I describe this?
It sounds like something. Well, not that I'm going to describe it any better, but you're describing a show that works on every single level, from just kind of like the minute details of its production, to the characters, to the scenarios that they get into, to the overarching story and the way it twists and turns. That it's just like every component of it is fantastic.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But unlike something like Mad Men, where I can't really say that there's anything about the show that doesn't work, except I don't love it. I have issues with the way that that Mad Men draws its story over the course of its seasons, because I feel like it introduces plot lines and drops them without reason, and after a certain amount of time, everything starts to feel arbitrary, and that bothers me. But in True Detective, like, every second of that show is either related to the conflict that the characters are creating and or trying to resolve, or the murder mystery. And it spends a lot of time away from the murder mystery because the characters are so fascinating, and because the characters are so fascinating, and at the same time in conflict with each other, while digging through this really, this horrific murder, you just can't help but get sucked in and feel awful about. Well, I don't want to say about the world, but about like, about the process that creates these sorts of conflicts.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe that's what the show does, is rather than like most serial killer movies try and get you inside the head of the killer, and they pretend like they have some sort of answer for why the killer does these sorts of things. And I guess what True Detective does better, or does instead, is it puts the characters in the situation where they have to deal with this stuff, and that's what's interesting. Is the world is however you want to see it. You're either an atheist or you're a hardcore Christian. One way or another, you have to find a way to deal with someone who would commit these sorts of acts, who would create this sort of violence against other people, and you have to live in a world that supports it and constantly turns it out, and either accepts it or like I said, either accepts it or creates it. So yeah, True Detective is fascinating.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna move on to Better Call Saul. Let's move on here in just a moment. I gotta use the restroom. I'll just edit out the little break here. So I'll be back in just a minute.
Cool.
All right, I'm back.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
so we're gonna move on to Better Call Saul. Now, I haven't seen the show yet, so I'm gonna interrogate you about it.
All right, but you've seen Breaking Bad.
I have seen Breaking Bad. I've seen all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad. I adore it. Vince Gilligan, I think, is a genius, and he also wrote some of my favorite episodes of The X-Files. So I'm excited about Better Call Saul, only because it's involved in, not only because it involves Vince Gilligan, but primarily because it involves Vince Gilligan. But I'm also hesitant because I'm not a big fan of spin-offs, and I didn't think that Breaking Bad needed a spin-off.
I'm so with you.
And I was worried because Saul Goodman is a great supporting character. I questioned whether or not he could actually take the lead in a TV show. So my first question to you is, how is Saul Goodman as a lead?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So real quick, like I said, I was with you on, like, the show probably did not need a spin-off, and Breaking Bad was great, and like I just didn't want them to ruin the universe and stuff like that. And he surprisingly carries the show because he's not, it's a prequel, so he's not the Saul that we know or that we knew from Breaking Bad, but it's more so about that transformation. And the series starts out and he's dirt poor, and he drives a crappy car, and he's living out of like a Vietnamese nail salon, and it's about him getting that ball rolling and the people that he meets and stuff like that. And so not only does you have to excuse me, I don't know the name of the actor who plays Saul, but not only does he carry the weight of the show on his shoulders, like, fantastically, but they've given him this rich backstory, And
What is the backstory?
the supporting
give us the setup for the show.
Okay, so the setup's really interesting. In the very opening moments of the very first episode, which if I remember correctly, is actually filmed in black and white, I think.
I think that's correct.
It's him. Right, it's him where he ends up, right where right where Breaking Bad leaves off, and it's this depressing life that he's living. Looking out the blinds of his windows at nighttime and watching TV and stuff like that. And so there's even something chilling about that, just knowing that like his life is going on and he's looking over his shoulder like every second he's not at work or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the heart of the show is, I'm trying to remember, he's not even known as Saul Goodman yet. It's whatever his real name is. He used to,
right.
Trying to think of how to describe this in the best way. It's about this law firm that he used to work at. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to describe this also without spoiling some of the fun like twists that you find out in like the first 4 or 5 episodes of the show. It's about a firm that he no longer works for. It's about why he doesn't work there anymore. It's about a character named Chuck, who's very close to him, who we'll just say he has some issues. It's about a mentally unstable character. Scott, you need to help me here. I'm trying to think of what you want to know without spoiling it for you. It's one of those shows. It's kind of like I just want to say that set your worries aside, that it does work, and that you should watch it, and that you should experience it and let yourself be surprised by it, much in the same way that that Breaking Bad surprised people for the first time. I think some of the things that are wonderful about the show is, like I said, Goodman himself, the supporting cast, every single like scene in this show is like filmed with just like purpose and intent, and like every shot is perfect and deliberate, and it's like once again the production team has brought like this certain level of like artistry to this series that you just don't get with other shows, and like the writing is fantastic again, and it's a roller coaster ride. And like at first, like just from the first episode alone, I wasn't sure how much like I was or wasn't feeling it, but it does that thing where once the ball gets pushed down the hill, you want to be able to binge watch it, but you can't, because
right.
like, yeah.
But the setup is that it's Better Call. It's Saul Goodman before Breaking Bad.
Exactly, yeah. And so
I think they say it's 6 years before Breaking Bad begins, before he meets Walter White.
Right.
And it's Saul Goodman under his original name, which is Jimmy McGill.
There you go.
And he's working as, I forget what he's working as. Is he a lawyer?
He is, but he's the kind of, and that's the other thing is you start finding out about like how he became a lawyer and stuff like that. You find out about how he went from a guy, like from a con artist living in like Cicero, a city right outside of Chicago, which is actually the backstory they gave him, which, growing up Chicago boys ourselves, it was kind of interesting that they chose that area for him to grow up in. And yeah, so it's about him going from being a con artist himself to like a lawyer, and like how his life was changed and stuff like that by the people in it. But yeah, he's not the loud soul that you know from Breaking Bad with the the law office with the whatever the big mural in the background and stuff like that, and on billboards everywhere and whatnot. He's the kind of lawyer that doesn't work pro bono, but he works for the state basically, and he gets all like the crappy cases. Like people who.
Oh, so is he the DA?
Yeah, is that what it is? Your district attorney. When you are appointed an attorney because you can't afford one, like he's that guy.
Oh, he's that guy. Okay.
So he starts off. He's defending people who are blatantly whatever. We're all innocent until proven guilty. No, these people are guilty, and he's got to figure out ways to spin all the crap that they've done into like getting them as like minor of sentences as like humanly possible based on the things they've done and stuff like that. And the show is equal parts like serious and heartfelt and like funny. Like once again, it's this brilliant mixture of you'll laugh, you'll cry.
Yeah.
I didn't think they could do it either. I was totally skeptical about it. All I can say for right now is, You should definitely check it out, and we should definitely flesh out a conversation about it. Because I'm afraid I'll, like I said, if I go into too many things like the character of Chuck and kind of like the history of the this big mega law firm that he used to work for and stuff like that, I'm going to spoil some of the surprise of being able to have that stuff unveiled to you for the first time. Because they do this thing where they introduce certain characters, like the character of Chuck, most importantly right now, who for the first episode makes an appearance. And then the second episode you learn more about, and it's kind of like every single episode you learn more about each of the characters, and it just makes you want to unravel this world even more. But at the same time, the thing that's interesting about it is that no matter how much trouble he gets into, it's like you know that he... spoilers for Breaking Bad people. Maybe if you haven't watched Breaking Bad, you don't want to hear this, but like you know that he walked out of all of that craziness that he got into alive. And so there's this little part of my brain that watches these episodes and wonders when they're going to go back to the black and white footage of that very first episode and how safe he really is, like in the grand scheme of the Breaking Bad universe and whatnot. The other thing that they do that's really, really endearing is you meet the remember the character of Mike from Breaking Bad?
Mike Ehrmantraut.
Yes. You meet him for the first time, and you see what he's doing and kind of like his character before, 6 years ago and stuff like that. And he's as likable of a character in his very weird Mike kind of way as he ever was. Like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, and
I love Mike Ehrmantraut.
Yeah, their banter and their exchanges and stuff like that, it's all there. And the thing that's brilliant about it, at least in my opinion, is none of it feels forced or rushed or desperate. It's like they've taken the time to really tell a really unique story, despite the familiarity of some of the content,
Yeah. And I guess I shouldn't have doubted Vince Gilligan. He's great, and I guess the other writers involved, I think one of them's Peter Gould, and I can't remember the other guy. They worked a lot on Breaking Bad together, and so it seemed like a pretty natural, and they're still involved in Better Call Saul, so it's not like they spun off and got a whole new
right.
And of course, with as successful as Breaking Bad was, AMC has the utmost confidence in Vince Gilligan to create a great show again as well. They need him to, and so they kind of have to let him do whatever he wants. And Vince Gilligan is one of these guys who I think has proven that when he gets to do what he wants, he turns out something pretty great. I'm glad to hear that everybody. I'm glad to hear that everybody's enjoying it. One of my concerns was that I was worried that people were going to enjoy it because they wanted to enjoy it, as opposed to thinking that it was going to be as good as Breaking Bad, and then liking it whether or not it was any good.
Yeah, I was going to say oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Go on.
The opinion just seems to be that it is actually a legitimately good show.
Yeah, it is a legitimately good show. And to kind of like piggyback that notion, the thing I was going to say was they do this thing also where I feel like if you've never watched a single episode of Breaking Bad, that the show is probably great on its own. Just the character and the story and stuff like that's really interesting. But they throw in the Breaking Bad Easter eggs where, for example, like Saul's character gets into a confrontation. Like I said, I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to speak in general terms. Let's say he gets into a very serious and ridiculous confrontation with I'll call him a gang member for just to be like generic about it. Sure. And then you realize that like it's somebody 6 years earlier from the Breaking Bad universe. It's somebody who we know from Breaking Bad becomes like this head of like one of like the meth operations and stuff like that, but like here in Better Call Saul, this person's living with their grandma, this sweet old lady, and like the grandma doesn't realize that they're in on like all this really terrible stuff. And so it's like you have this alternate perspective of these characters where, because you watch Breaking Bad, it's kind of like you know what this person ends up being and kind of like what they're capable of. But if you're watching the show for the first time, it's I don't know. It's just like you have a different perspective on it, and it's so cool just seeing all that stuff unfold and all the the potential that the show has from different viewpoints and stuff like that. It's pretty brilliant.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. And they're also shooting it in Albuquerque, which is just down the road from me.
I was gonna say, yeah, I wasn't sure how they were doing that, but the establishing shots and all that stuff, always like just the vibe of the show feels super legit in that regard.
Yep. Well, that's because it's super cheap by comparison to shoot in New Mexico, so
Okay.
it doesn't hurt at all to go ahead and shoot on a location in Albuquerque. And also, I was here when Breaking Bad was ending-ish. I think they had done seasons 1 through 4, and they were getting ready to start 5. So, knowing that this was going to be the last season for the show, they were putting up billboards all over town. One of them was pretty great. It was a picture of Walter White and Jesse. It said, "Thank you, Albuquerque. We had great chemistry together." It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So cool. I'm really glad to hear that Better Call Saul is as good as it needs to be in order to follow up something like Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Would you say that it's as good as Breaking Bad, or is it just good enough to not ruin Breaking Bad?
You know what it is? I would say it's as good as Breaking Bad only because it's different. I feel like despite its roots and everything, it's really doing its own thing with the way that with the writing and the storytelling and stuff like that. And so it's not like it's living in its shadow because it's very much just like existing in its own light, so to speak.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah, move on to games?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. So we got a doozy up here on the top of the list here, Shadow of the Colossus.
Yes.
So you told me recently that you're friends with, or you know the guy who's writing a book on this game?
Yeah, my friend Nick Sutner, who currently works for Sony, he I think his position is like, oh, never mind. I'm gonna not remember his position. His job entails essentially courting and working with independent game developers to make games for the Sony PlayStation Network. So he has had his thumbs in all of the pies of the great indie games that have been either PSN exclusives or started out on PSN.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty exciting to listen to him talk about his job, not just because he's really good at it, but because he really enjoys video games and the video game world.
Yeah.
And he has excellent taste in video games, and basically, if he tells me I have to play a game, I play it. And my understanding, and this relationship, I mean, I've known him for years, and I knew him before this, and I knew him before Shadow, but it solidified when I was living in Los Angeles, and he flew out to Los Angeles, brought his PlayStation and his copy of Shadow of the Colossus, and put the controller in my hand, hooked it up to my TV, and said, "You have to play this game." And so I did, and he was absolutely right. It's tremendous, and he has been a huge supporter of this game since it first released. He was, when he was writing on a tiny little website called Gpinions back in the day, he wrote article after article about this game. When he was working for 1UP, he did a giant podcast as a playthrough about it. He even got a chance to interview, is it Ueda? I can't remember his first name.
Oh, yeah, the game's director. Yeah. I know who you're talking. Yeah.
So he has been, neck deep in this game for as long as it's been around. And very recently, he put in a bid with a company called Boss Fight Books or Boss Fight Publishing, something like that, to write a coffee table-like book on Shadow of the Colossus. And he recently received word that they're going to give him that opportunity. And so he is currently, in fact, I think his most recent tweet was talking about how he was sitting down to write the Shadow of the Colossus book. So I think it's due in September.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think that's when the draft is due. I think it'll come out next year.
Do you know any of the details about like what the book itself is going to be about, like in regards to, like, is it going to be about the production, about the lore, about the art, a little bit of everything?
I think it's going to be about the experience of playing the game. One of the things, I read his pitch, and the pitch was a lot about what Shadow of the Colossus is as a piece of art.
Okay.
And what it's like to exist in its world as the little avatar of that character, who in Japan I think it was called Wanda and the Colossus. So as a joke, we often refer to that character as Wanda, even though the game doesn't give them a name.
Okay.
So yeah, I think he's going to talk a lot about what it is to play Shadow of the Colossus and what sort of experience you get out of it, and then he'll probably go into some of the thematics of the game, as well as the visual design and uniqueness of the game itself.
Cool. And so then you said, so the first time you played it, when he brought it to you in Los Angeles, was that literally the first time ever that you laid hands on it?
Yes, absolutely.
And was it around when the game came out, or was it a little bit afterwards, or?
That's a good question. I think it was in August of 2006 that I played it.
Okay.
No, June of 2006.
Okay, so yeah, just a little bit after it would have came out. It came out in like 2005, I guess October 2005 in the U.S.
Oh, really? No, it was August. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was the first time I played it, and it stuck in my brain. It's the game that convinced me that video games can be a compelling and deep art. Because for me, the game's minimalism is key. It doesn't. The setup for the game is that you're this character in a semi-medieval like universe or world, I guess I should say. You're riding a horse, and you have a thin lady draped over the back of the horse. And you ride the horse across this giant bridge towards this temple in the middle of a devastated landscape. It's very desert-like, Badlands, sort of South Dakota-ish. And you bring the horse and the girl into the temple, and you put her on an altar, and then a voice tells you that it can save this girl if you defeat these 16 colossi.
Yeah.
That's the setup for the game. That's it. And then there's a little bit about this group of people who are chasing the main character, but really you don't see them until the end of the game, and they don't interact with the story at all. It is in some ways a spiritual either sequel or prequel, depends on your interpretation of the ending of the game, to a game called Ico, which was also made by Ueda, and that development team. I can't remember what they're called.
Team Ico, or Team Eco.
Oh, it is Team Eco.
Yeah, I don't know if that's just an informal name that was given to them, but that's what everybody knows them by.
It might be. So anyway, yeah, depending on your interpretation, you either are the boy from the first game or you become the boy from the first game. So who knows? Yeah. But what Shadow of the Colossus does amazingly well is that it gives you a conflict that you need to solve. You want to try and save this woman. You are then given a definite solution to the problem. You kill these colossi for this spirit, and he'll save the girl. So you spend the rest of the game hunting down these colossi. And one thing that struck me, and I think it strikes everybody who plays the game, is you don't want to kill these colossi.
I know, they just seem like they're peaceful, lumbering beasts minding their own business, right?
Absolutely. They are peaceful, lumbering beasts just minding their own business, and they don't really get mad at you until you start attacking them.
Yeah.
And then you claw your way around the body of these creatures looking for their special stabby point, and you just burrow your sword into their body and pull it out, and this giant trail of blood comes, spurting out of their head or their side or their arm or whatever. And it's very visceral, the game. The controls are really sloppy, and it's intentional. You're climbing up this thing, and it shakes you off, and you try and grab a hold of its fur or one of its grab points and try and claw back up onto it, and you get this massive sense of scale while you're riding this thing around the landscape. And so you're exhausted as you're playing the game, and you're frustrated. I remember my most recent playthrough, I was kind of like yelling at the screen. I was like, oh yeah, what I want to do right now is fall right back off this thing. And so each Colossus is sort of a puzzle. It's a sort of a boss, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And at the end of each Colossi, you collapse, and these streams of black liquid or spiritual entities or who knows what, but it's this mystical black force pierces your body, and you wake up back in the temple. And I think it's okay to spoil the ending of the game because we're many years on from here.
Yeah, we should talk about it openly at this point.
Okay. The end of the game, this massive spirit essentially, it's not a trick because he does save the girl for you, but he turns you into a giant demon.
Yeah.
That is created entirely out of this black material that came out of the Colossi. So my interpretation is that these Colossi were created after killing this giant beast, and they were imbued with 1/16 of its power
Mhm.
and spread across the land because that was a way to keep it from destroying the world, essentially. But on a smaller thematic scale, it deals with violence and your motivation for violence. Is it worth killing these creatures that were holding back a greater evil to save one person?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
From a emotionally charged like gameplay perspective, like the end of that game also had like it was just like very impactful to me because there's a certain point in the storyline. I believe it's after you kill, let's say, like 4 of the Colossi, where the game goes to a very brief cutscene of these people, like a tribe of some sort, like actually making their way to the same lands that you just arrived at.
Yeah.
And so then it does this thing where at the end of the game, when you become the giant evil entity, you actually have to play and control and kind of clunk around with in an impromptu fashion, like being the giant monster trying to swat at the little gnats down at the ground, and they're faster than you, and they're shooting arrows up at you. And in that moment, I was like, oh my god, that's what these things felt like to like battle me. They just felt slow and sluggish and helpless while I, just like ran circles around them, and like my mind was blown that like I felt even more sad and horrible in that moment that's what I put these things through time and time again. Like, oh man.
Yeah. Yeah, the game turns it around on you. You become a version of a Colossi, and then you have all those shooting at you. Yeah, and it really hits you emotionally, which is such a strange thing because you're so invested in the gameplay. I think partially because it's sloppy, so you're always wrestling with the controls, so you physically get into it.
Yeah. It's sloppy, but might I add that it's beautifully animated. Like everything from the Colossi to the fidelity of the animation and the character yourself. Like even when you're toppling over and you're tumbling or like grabbing onto a ledge for like dear life or something like that, there's a level of like character animation like in that game, and Ico for what it's worth, that's kind of like unprecedented on like the PS2 and a lot of video games in general at that time, I felt.
No, you're absolutely correct, or at least I agree with you. One thing, the controls are absolutely accurate. And so if you are climbing up a Colossi and you run out of your grab power, which is just one of the meters, you only have 2 meters. You have your strength, which is, I was just referring to as grab power.
Oh,
and then you have your health, and that's it. Because you don't have arrows that you run out of, and your sword doesn't break or anything like that. So, if you're climbing up a Colossi and you run out of your grab power or your strength or whatever you want to call it, and you start tumbling off the thing, and you go to try and grab onto either a ledge or some more fur, if your body is not in a position where it would realistically be able to grab that bit, you fall.
Yeah.
And if you're still recovering your strength as you're doing it, you can't grab onto new material. So there are so many times in the game where I'm at the top of a Colossi and you're wrestling with, and I'm wrestling with the decision to either let go and hope I don't fall off, or hang on and see if I can get one more stab in. And it's a small decision to have to make, because the consequence for dying isn't even all that dramatic, but you don't want to let go. You want to try and take it down. You really want to stay on the thing because it's such a puzzle and it's such an effort to get to the Colossus. That's another thing we should say. The exploration of the game is, I'm going to say it's not rewarding, but it's also very rewarding at the same time because you can't find anything in this game.
Yeah.
The only thing you can pick up are like lizard tails and fruit. And fruit gives you health, and lizard tails give you more strength, a greater strength meter.
Yeah, same thing with the health. It extends the bar, actually, right?
Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. It extends the health bar. And so this desolated landscape is massive, and you have to find each Colossi one at a time as you go through it. And your sword, if you hold it up in the light, will point you in the right direction. But the game design is such that it by no means tells you how to get there. And so you can get really turned around and lost as you're traveling across the land, and then you get to the Colossus, and you have to figure out how to get onto the Colossus, and you have to find where its special spot is. So once you're up on this Colossus, you've had probably 2 or 3 hours, depending on how quick you are at some of this stuff. Maybe it's even less than that. Maybe it's only like half hour or 40 minutes. But you've spent a lot of time just getting to this point where you can take down the Colossus. So when you're up there and you're running out of grab strength, you're thinking, no, I just got up here.
Yeah.
Damn it, no. So it engages you on a tactful level, and then of course its simple story engages you emotionally with the girl and with the violence and the seemingly docile Colossus. Colossi. It's bizarrely complex for such a simple game.
Yeah. It does this thing at the end of the game also where I forget what caused it. Like something happens and there's like this big portal. I don't want to call it a portal. Like something sucking energy into like nothingness essentially, and you have the opportunity to hang on to like this. I forget what the setup is, like the edge of like this ring that you were like battling on or something like that, and the game will like eternally just like suck you into that point, and it's like the one time in the game where you actually don't have a strength meter and you can keep holding down the R1 button or whatever it is and holding onto this ledge while your body flaps in the wind against this like anti-gravity or whatever, and you spend the whole game just like you said, like clinging on to beards and ledges and all like the different elements, mountain edges in the colossi and stuff like that. And the game is like telling you that like no matter how hard you try, no matter how long you want to hold down this button in this moment, you will lose, and there is nothing you can do about it. And it was just like another one of those things that messes with you and is like incredibly powerful from kind of like a storytelling gameplay mechanic, perspective, in the way that they combine those two elements to like yet again like make a statement.
Yeah, it pits you against fate. It's like it doesn't matter how strong you are or how much you've tried. There are some forces that you have no strength against.
Yeah. So it is one of my favorite games ever made. It's almost in a very weird and silly kind of way. Almost like a day of my life doesn't go by where I don't think about it to like some capacity. Like for example, we walk the dog to the park every single day, because just like part of the routine and stuff like that, and the park's outside and it's by water and stuff like that, and so there's like little bugs flying around, and we'll be walking on the sidewalk, and I don't know why, but like the bugs, they always want to like smack you in the face or like try to pelt you in the eye or something like that, and I'll always like turn to Gina and I'll always say like, do you think to them that we're just these slow lumbering beasts that are like swinging in slow motion trying to hit them? And then my brain always goes to like Shadow of the Colossus. It's inevitable.
Yeah, no, that's another great point too, because the scale of this game is tremendous.
Yeah.
It's for whatever reason, like even movies do this too. Like you can have a shot or an image of something that's very big, but it doesn't feel big, or it's big but it doesn't mean anything to you. And then you get into a game like Shadow of the Colossus or the opening of God of War 3, and they managed to put the elements in the frame of the game, which you get to control, which is amazing. And it creates this massive sense of scale. And so you really feel how small you are compared to these giant colossi. And as you climb up them, you get a greater view of the surrounding landscape as well. And you can see where you've just ridden your horse across. And the world then feels complete. And then you get a good sense for just how tiny you are and the massive effect that you're going to have against these huge creatures.
Yeah.
The scale in the game is excellent, and it's aided by its soundtrack as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's one of the best video game soundtracks ever. Yeah.
I used to have just the soundtrack on disc, and I would just listen to it as I was writing or playing around on the internet and stuff. And the game triggers these songs at just the right time, and so it's really quiet and brooding as you're trying to sneak up to the thing, and then once you finally grab on and climb up, it triggers another song, and then once you're ready to start stabbing at it,
oh my gosh, yeah,
it goes into that big swinging song, and you just can't help but like sway in your seat at the same time. It's beautifully put together, and everything works very well together.
Yeah. And like you were saying, like we touched on loosely before, kind of just like you're saying, the in-between moments when you're not battling the Colossi, just the lighting in the game and just the sound of water and wind through, like, caves and caverns and stuff like that, and just like the rustling of like leaves and stuff like that. It's like when you're not battling, it's one of the most like peaceful and tranquil games you've also ever played,
Yeah, but I also find it to be a really unsettling world because it's so empty. The only other living creatures you find are those lizards.
Yeah, true.
And there are two kinds of lizards. One is a white tail, and it's the white tail one that you need to chop up so that you can get more strength.
Yeah.
But you also find all these ruins. You find the little prayer temples or sanctuaries, and you find busted down temples or villages and things like that, and they're spread out over this massive landscape that just has no life in it otherwise. And so the other question you wonder is, like, as you're going along through the game, you're thinking, why am I killing these giant docile creatures?
Mm-hmm.
And two, what happened to this land? And for some of us who are more perceptive than others, I was not, you might start to think, maybe it's not a good idea to go kill these colossi because maybe I'm just bringing back some sort of evil. And then you get pierced with those little black tentacles, and you think, that supports that theory.
Yeah.
But you made a point about fate earlier, and I feel like that's another thing that the game weaves, which is that the game doesn't give you the choice to not kill these colossi. And in the same way that we're playing this game and inflicting this virtual violence on these creatures, this character is going through the motions to save this person regardless of the action that's actually being taken.
Mm-hmm.
Putting no ethical thought into it.
Oh yeah, just like this is what must be done, then this is what I'll do. The other thing that's kind of brilliant about it also is from a storytelling perspective, you're given no backstory on her whatsoever. Obviously, then that the main character obviously cares about her deeply to bring her all the way out to wherever this place is and do these things for her. It almost gives you the opportunity to personify her maybe the way you want or ignore that. It's just there's a lot of different ways you can look at her and her relationship to him and her relationship to you as a gamer. It's like if you want to kind of like put your life experiences into her and stuff like that, you can do it. There's just so many different ways to view it.
Yeah, and I think it's a deliberate part of the thematics as well, that here is just a really basic setup. Save girl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you want to look at it that way, yeah.
Save girl, kill monster. And then as you start putting together the details of the story, you start to wonder, why? And is this worth it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the game is most effective for me, other than, of course, as an exhilarating gaming experience. But it uses the game mechanics and the impetus of completing a quest as a game to create a thoughtful, a thoughtful experience on violence and on even innocence to a point, but also on motivation, like what we use as motivation to defend our actions.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things, that doesn't have to be the last things, but I feel like we can't have had this conversation without mentioning the horse. And I don't know if his name is Arrow or Agro or Agro. But like you were saying, how the world is very like devoid of life. There's the like you're saying, there's the lizards. There's actually some sort of like hawks or like big birds flying around. And I guess
that's right.
The PAL version of the game has I think they squeezed a little bit of more power out of like the PS2 for the PAL version, and they added some other little like squirrel-like critters and stuff like that in some of the forests. But like you're saying, there's nobody else to like talk to or anything like that.
Sure.
And so this game also becomes about the main character's relationship with this animal, with this horse that he rides on and journeys from point A to point B with and whatnot.
The mechanic that they use for Agro also feels very alive, and so it feels like you're interacting with a creature that has a mind of its own.
Oh, yeah.
There are times when you call the horse and he takes way too long to show up. There are times you tell him to gallop ahead and he just kind of shuffles his feet. It's fun. I actually named my second car after him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I called it Agro, the white wagon.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I forget, since we said we're going to talk openly about this anyways, do they do a thing towards the end of the game where, whether you see it coming or not, don't they injure the horse and then of course it crushes you inside to see him limping or something like that? Isn't there a scene where...
Yeah, it's like the most devastating moment I've ever experienced in a video game.
Yeah.
You're riding to the last Colossus, and the bridge you're riding across gives out, and so you leap, and you make it, and the horse doesn't.
That's right.
And he goes down into this crevasse, and I remember my jaw just fell open, and I was like, no! Oh, no! He comes back, though, which is in some ways a little disappointing, because it lessens that experience, but he comes back at the end.
With a limp, right?
With a limp, yeah. He's clearly hurt.
Yeah, I think that was... I kind of, since we're talking about this, I want to like briefly mention The Last Guardian, and we could talk, I'm sure, for hours and hours and hours about that. But kind of
how could we? There's nothing to talk about.
Oh, no. Well, okay, so when the game was initially in development, or had been for the first couple of years and stuff like that, I remember reading a lot of just kind of like general, not even, I wouldn't call them theories online, but people were saying like, okay, so of course what's going to be done with this game, like Shadow of the Colossus, is you're going to have this beast that you journey with the whole time, and towards the end of the game, you're going to develop a relationship for, both the character and the game, and you as a player, and to some extent that's going to be taken away from you, kind of like almost happened with, the horse from Shadow of the Colossus. And I was like, darn it, you're right. He's totally going to play, the director, totally going to play those cards and play on those emotions and stuff like that, and it'll probably work, but the thing that'll be disappointing with it is, like, now I feel like we're all going to be on guard, and we're all going to look for it. And part of me almost wondered if that would have happened, or if you would have been smarter and, like, known that, like, no, I can't tell that story again. Like, I can't do that to players again, because they'll see it coming, or if that wouldn't be something he'd worry about. But
yeah.
Long story short, not a single E3 goes by where myself, along with what seems like the rest of the internet, isn't wondering if it's going to be the E3 where we finally get to see The Last Guardian.
And there was that teaser trailer for it a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was right about the same time Penny Arcade had a comic that basically summed up just what you said there. It just had the two guys talking in the first panel saying, Last Guardian is going to end one of two ways. And the first panel,
did they do it?
Yeah, the second panel of the comic was, the Guardian is dead and the kid is crying next to the dead body, and then the third panel was, the kid's dead and the Guardian is crying next to the kid's body. And so we were like, yep, that's right, that's probably what's going to happen. But yeah, all we got was that trailer, and then it's been in production hell. Back and forth. It was supposed to release on PS3, and then it was supposed to be on PS3, and then it wasn't going to be on PS3, and then it was going to go back to PS3, and yeah, I don't know what's happened, but man, do I want that game. Like that and Half-Life 3.
I know, yeah, I'm with you on Half-Life 3. Just ridiculous. Did you, actually, this is going to throw us off topic, but did you read, kind of recently, within this past week or so, actually, or the past 2 weeks, that Gabe Newell kind of finally started talking about, some of the pressures regarding, like, Half-Life 3 and, like, trying to make sure that the technology that they're developing aligns with, like, their visions for, like, continuing with, like, sequels and things like that. It just felt like for the first time in a long time he was addressing, like, yes, we know you guys want it, and we're trying to figure out how to do something, you know, without saying, yes, we're working on it. He sort of said, like, we hear you. Shut up.
Yeah, I can imagine he's probably annoyed at this point.
Yeah.
Just because it's not that Valve's been sitting on their thumbs. They created Steam, and they've been running with that, and they're working on the Steam OS, and they're coming up with a whole bunch of stuff, but at the same time, like, Steam OS is far behind, and they released a new engine. It's going to be free, but that's not news to the gamers, just the developers. Their controller is still far behind for SteamOS, and the guy is revered in the gaming industry, specifically the PC gaming industry. So, and he clearly knows what he's doing, and Steam is amazing. So I'm not gonna like push him for it. And also, I would hate to see a Half-Life 3 that's garbage. I would rather wait and get a good Half-Life 3. And there's no shortage of good games to play in the meantime. That said, The Last Guardian is something that I really do want to play, and I want to play it sooner rather than later, because Half-Life is a great game, but Shadow of the Colossus and The Last Guardian, those are artful, emotional experiences, and fulfilling ones at that I want to play. And so, even again, I'm not going to be impatient about it, but I'm more interested in A Last Guardian than Half-Life 3.
Okay. See, I feel... Actually, I might feel the opposite about that, like where I would take Half-Life 3 over The Last Guardian, only because... because I really need The Last Guardian to be as emotionally intelligent as prior two works were.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm afraid that, I don't know, because I'm older now and the development took so long, I'm just afraid that the stars aren't going to align and provide the experience that I imagined it would have been like all those years ago before, we had waited 8+ years for it and whatnot. Whereas with like Half-Life 3, I'm just like, I don't know, just make an amazing, innovative shooter with, I don't know, an incredible sci-fi setting. Just easy, just do it. Just the thing with Half-Life 2 also, I believe that the person who did like the art direction and stuff like that for Half-Life 1 and 2, I think he went on to work on the Dishonored game. So I believe that Valve lost their lead artist on the Half-Life series also, which I wonder if that was one of the things that set them back. Obviously I'm being sarcastic. Like the weight of the world is on both of those developers' shoulders to produce the most amazing experience in their respective genres that gamers have ever, been able to hold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Huh.
But yeah, at the same time, I'll take either one of them in any way that I can. I just, if you at this point, if you need another 2 years to make both those games the most amazing things ever, then take them, because we've already waited like over 8 years, longer than that for Half-Life 3.
Yeah. Yeah, Half-Life 2 came out when I built my first PC. In fact, it came with my video card.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first 64-bit processor that I ever had. So that was quite a while ago. That's 10 years.
Okay, yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in regards to Shadow of the Colossus, then, what do we say? It came out in 2006. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Half-Life 2 would have been 2005.
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, should we move on to something else now? We've talked about Shadow a lot. Okay, obviously. Oh, wait, that's what I wanted to ask you real quick. I didn't want to get too much into the HD collection and stuff like that, but when you go and play it now, are you hooking up a PS2 to your TV and playing it, or are you just playing the HD collection?
No, funny thing, I never owned a PS2.
Oh, okay.
I bought Shadow of the Colossus for PS2, but I never owned a PS2.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I loved the game so much, I wanted to be able to lend it out to people.
Yeah.
And my roommate at the time had a PS2, so it was all right. But
oh, nice.
Yeah, I've been playing the HD collection. Sort of mixed feelings about that, but one thing that's nice about it is that it runs a lot smoother. It really
does, yeah.
It taxed the hell out of the PS2. And the graphics are a little bit smoother. There were times in Shadow of the Colossus when, the PS2 just wasn't a good enough system for it.
Yeah.
And the PS3 runs it nice and smooth. In 720p and all that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's one of those things also where I wasn't sure how I felt about, just the idea of an HD remaster of it, just in general from a, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, kind of like a moral standpoint.
Yeah.
But I guess I do appreciate the fact that it's a lot easier to play it and more people can play it because they did make it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit different with Shadow of the Colossus because all they did was clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I played Secret of Monkey Island when I was a kid, and it was a 16-bit game, or maybe if it was that, and super blocky and hard to see things, and it worked. You could still play it. And very recently, or in the last 5 years or so, they came out with a really polished new version of Secret of Monkey Island with voice acting, and it is a noticeably different game.
Yeah. Even
though it's the exact same game. And so I'm still struggling with how I feel about that, because when I was playing Secret Monkey Island, I thought, I'll play in the old graphics, like when I was a kid, and you could hit a button on the controller and it would take you back and forth between the two so you could compare.
Yeah.
I always went back to the newer, better graphics.
Yeah.
I hardly hesitated. And so, yeah, there's a part of me that's not quite sure how to feel, because in movies when Lucas went and messed with Star Wars and Spielberg with E.T., you're really changing the movie at that point, and it's almost like you're trying to apologize for the movie being made 20 years earlier. And and it's not the same movie that people saw, and people loved it despite or because of its flaws, or because of the technology at the time. They aren't even flaws. And so it's sort of presumptuous to say, hey, we've got better technology now, we can make the game better. But at the same time, games rely so much on technology that, it does make Secret of Monkey Island more accessible.
Right.
It's not like you're taking BioShock and up-resing it to 4K. Because at that point, who cares? It's still the same game. Monkey Island is a noticeably different game when you play it, at thousands of lines of resolution more.
Right.
Or not thousands, but hundreds.
It can affect you. Something like that can affect you on a psychological level also, because like back when we were just staring at, big blocky pixels that were meant to represent like faces and clothing and backgrounds and stuff like that. It's like now you can see the fully illustrated like cartoon version of that, and I don't know, you use less of your imagination and stuff like that for better or worse, but at the same time they're able to convey the story perhaps more accurately with the way they wish they initially would have been able to. And I'm not saying that's how they feel about it. I'm just saying that there's always pros and cons to making those kinds of decisions. But because of that, a very brilliant one, in my opinion, to be able, like you said, at the press of a button to switch back and forth between the two art styles.
Yeah, and I'm glad both versions are there, and so that if you really do have an issue with it, you can go back to the old graphics. What fascinated me was, for as much of a stickler as I am for trying to play games or experience movies in their original form, I didn't even hesitate to go back to the newer graphics because it was so much more accessible and easier to play. So
cool. Yeah. Okay. We're going to touch on some Monkey Island, and we didn't even...
I also love that game. I reference it as frequently as I can.
Yeah. Well, so we've got a couple of more topics here on like the games list that we can touch on briefly. Yeah. Actually, kind of just want to skip around and do Dragon Age before we touch on the Soul series, just because the Soul series will be a longer conversation. Recently beat Dragon Age Inquisition after like about 94 hours, and like I didn't have to spend 94 hours. I've heard that if you plow through the main story content in that game, you can do it closer to like 12 or 15. But I just really wanted to turn over like all the rocks and stuff like that, and do almost all the content that I could before I hit up, say, the final encounter and whatnot. And you said you played the beginning of that game. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I did. I think I played 10 hours.
Yeah, and you said like it was okay. It wasn't really your thing. You didn't really enjoy the combat that much, correct?
Yeah, I did. I wasn't interested in the game at all, actually.
Oh, okay.
I was playing it compulsively. Sort of like Skyrim, it's just a go and fetch game. You pick up one quest, and then you go to the point where it tells you to go, and you finish the quest.
Yeah.
So it was really, easy to just accumulate a lot of quests and then fulfill them.
That's one of the things that I ended up loving about the game was I enjoyed the dialogue and the banter between the characters while I was questing, and I felt like playing the game was actually very relaxing. Like it was sort of a mindless experience in the best possible way. Like if that's the kind of thing that you're looking for, it's just a game to relax and play and just explore beautiful environments with great art direction and stuff like that. But the one thing that pissed me off towards the end of the game, and maybe it was I felt like I became too strong in the game and I broke it. So there's a part of me that's like, I broke the game for myself, which made me angry. But then there's a part of me that's I played as a mage. I started off as a mage. And while I was playing and like streaming on our Twitch channel and whatnot, I had people say like, "Oh, are you going to become a knight enchanter? I hear they get really strong," and like kind of like giggling about it and stuff like that. And so when I got to the point where I could choose my subclass, I was like, the three subclasses were in front of me, and I was like, all right, I'm going to become a knight enchanter. I didn't read up on any of it, and people said it was really good and really fun, and you get a lightsaber like in Star Wars and stuff like that. And my character became so powerful with this knight enchanter spirit build that I went with that I was literally indestructible in that game. I was trying to find enemies that were strong enough for me to go up against to kind of like test out my abilities, and when I went on that journey to try to test out my new powers and stuff like that, I accidentally stumbled upon a dragon that I didn't know existed in the world. And that fight against the dragon taught me not only how to utilize that class to its full potential, but also that in literally a 5-minute span in the game. I went from getting crushed by a dragon to being able to solo it while all my other party members had died. I'm just like sitting there beating on this dragon. Like, okay, and so like all of a sudden in the game after I killed that dragon, I was like, well, all the other dragons that kick my butt in the game, I'm going to go hunt them. And so I went on a dragon hunt, and it was just like nothing mattered anymore. And so I went through the whole rest of the game, the final story missions and like all the dragon encounters and stuff like that, just knowing that none of it mattered. I couldn't be killed. I could play as sloppy as I wanted to. I would have to like literally stand there and not want to win at the game. Like it just, it felt super broken and unbalanced, and it almost made me feel like, I don't know, combine that with like a lackluster second half of the story in the game, or at least like the finale was kind of lackluster. It just made me wonder like how much of the game was rushed in the end and whatnot. The other thing that I found out about the game, if you don't mind me kind of
go,
not really even spoilers, is that the thing that I like about those games and like the BioWare games is kind of like, you know, like making big decisions and being taken down like different paths in the game and stuff like that based on the decisions that you're making. And I felt like Dragon Age Origins, the first game in the trilogy, did like a really good job of not only making you feel like your decisions mattered, but showing you later on down the road of the game, you know, that like, wow, these decisions that you made, you know, like 35 hours ago, like there's repercussions or there's good things happening because of them. Whereas after I beat this game, I just kind of felt neutral towards the experience and the story and whatnot. And then so I went online and I read some blogs and I did some research, and it turns out the game does a really good job of making you feel like your decisions matter when in fact you're going to get the same ending to the game no matter what you do. And I just felt like, not like I wasted my time, because like I said, the whole game, it was fun and it was relaxing and I enjoyed it, but from like a storytelling perspective, I was just like, how dare you, you know, like sell this idea that like what you're doing matters, and like, you know, the whole basis for the marketing campaign and this and that in the game. And I was just like, I felt like I'd been had, kind of, you know. Like I said, there were some people that I was reading in some of these blogs and like comment sections of lesser known blogs and stuff like that, where people invested in this game to the point where, as opposed to my 94 hours of completion, where they had played it for 120, 150 hours and literally done everything just to get to the end of the game and feel utterly destroyed by the lack of, I don't know, consequence for choices and stuff like that. The game also does this thing where when you finally get to Skyhold, you'll go on you know, like some missions, and you'll find lumber yards, or you'll harvest like rock quarries and things like that, and you'll like upgrade your towers at your castle and stuff like that, thinking like, oh wow, at the end of the game, like the castle's going to get sieged, and you know, depending on how many of these rock quarries and lumber yards I go and find out in the game world, like that's going to, you know, like matter in regards to my defenses later, and like that's going to affect other things like how well we fortify ourselves, and nothing like that ever happens. Like so every lumber yard or rock quarry you go out of your way to find, like you get experience points from it, and you build a tower supposedly at Skyhold, and like it doesn't matter. Nothing in that game matters. And it's just like I said, I wasn't angry, but it blew my mind that was okay, that they felt like that was an okay way to design this game.
Yeah.
Like, just, how lazy. I don't know.
Interesting you say that, because the thing that I liked about the game was the effect you had on the environment. As I was going around playing, you were developing that clan or that resistance or whatever.
Right.
And you would go around and save little villages, and those villages would then be loyal to your cause. And it was cool because you could be out in the wilderness getting chased around, and you could run into this town and be safe again because you had saved that town previously. And that's a really great way for a video game to reward agency and to reward what you do on your quest and in your game, and to give weight to the decision to either save a village or you have to go to somewhere else first, you know?
Yeah.
So it's funny that in the end, you feel like even though you make all those sorts of decisions, you don't really get anything for it.
None of it matters. They never do anything with it. And like, for example, there's you get to this really big, I'll say, would-be turning point in the game where the Grey Wardens, who are in the lore of Dragon Age, pretty much like charged with the task of like defeating any archdemons that come up and could potentially just kind of like infect and destroy the world and stuff like that. And they're like this race of warriors that they're the only ones that can deal with the blight and whatnot. And the Grey Warriors are being, say, manipulated by like this mage clan and stuff like that, and so they've been corrupted to the point where at the end of the game, or not the end of the game, in the middle of the game, you can choose to save them and have them on your side, knowing that like yes, they will exist and they can take care of another blight should it happen, but like the downside of that is you're keeping them around and their minds have been corrupted once and they could succumb to like corruption again. So there's this this like, oh, well, what should I do? Should I just, like destroy them and like wipe them from existence, or keep them around knowing they can be corrupted, but knowing that they're one of the only things that can deal with like the archdemons? And so like I chose to keep them around and keep them at Skyhold and keep them as allies, knowing that like this could come to bite me in the ass later on, but nothing happens with it. Like it doesn't freaking matter, and it's like a huge thing that happens in the game. Like, oh man.
That's disappointing.
Yeah. So, like I said, long story short, while I thoroughly enjoyed my time with the game, and I wasn't angry at it like some people were, I just feel like, like kind of like I was alluding to, and might be a good segue here into like the Souls series and stuff like that. Kind of like I don't. It's a lot easier to trust small indie experiences, whether it comes to television or movies or games, than it does to really buy into like the hype and the marketing and all of the other presentation that goes behind the launch of like one of these giant AAA games. It's almost like I assume that I'm being lied to, when it comes to like marketing and behind the scenes developer videos and stuff like that comes out like before a game's launch. That, like I said, I assume I'm being lied to, and I just need to figure out as a consumer to what degree I'm being lied to, and then based on that kind of research, decide whether or not I'm going to buy into a new experience or not. And it's sad that that's what it's gotten to, at least for me.
No, it is, but it's interesting you mentioned the comparison between like TV and or indies and mainstream or Hollywood or TV and movies, because I think there's a really strong parallel between them. AAA games versus, say, a Hollywood movie, they both have a tremendous amount of money behind them and at risk. And so it is in their interest to try and attract as many people as possible. So it is not to try and create the most challenging piece that they can, but to create something that is widely accessible, easy to digest, and yet just enjoyable enough for you to come back for more, which is basically Marvel's formula. Although I think they fail more frequently, but at the same time, what has DC done recently? So like, DC doesn't have Captain America 2 or Iron Man or the Avengers even,
Yeah.
They've got Man of Steel and one of those green guys.
The Green Lantern?
Green Lantern, that's what it was. So then you get into the independent developers, and they're aiming for a very specific audience, and they will be able to sate the interests of those more accurately and more completely, because they don't have as much money at risk, or they're just an artist who's making the game that they want to make, and they will attract those people who want to play that game. And so, you get a game like Dark Souls versus a game like Dragon Age, and I don't know how much money was behind Dark Souls, but I don't think it even compares to what was behind Dragon Age.
Oh, probably not. Probably at least half.
But it still blows up. It still makes a really big impact, and now we've got 2 sequels.
Yeah.
And given the now loading that you put up earlier today, it sounds like you're having second thoughts on Bloodborne, which would be the 3rd installment of this series, or 4th installment of this series.
You noticed that, and I felt bad about that. I almost I wasn't sure how much of an apology that little Bloodborne segment in there should or shouldn't be, because the entire week, maybe even 2 weeks leading up to today, I had been kind of like I was describing earlier, just sort of buying into the marketing materials and jumping on the hype train and just looking for every little nook and cranny of information I could find online in regards to that game. Almost like I said, like doing my research, trying to find out how much am I being lied to, in regards to the experience that this game is going to provide and stuff like that. And Man, I'm gonna go off on like a little bit of a segue here, but like kind of like loop back around. I was having a discussion today briefly with Gina and our nephew Vince, kind of about how weird it is for Nintendo to have whitelists in regards to being able to stream their content online and become like a paid partner and stuff like that on Twitch and YouTube and channels like that. But how I realized that they were being just kind of like protective of their IPs and public perception of them and things like that. And it was just like part of the way that Nintendo, protects themselves and their games, whether you agree with it or not. And how the turning point was last night. Vince and I watched somebody stream Dark Souls on Twitch for, I don't know, the stream was like 3 hours long. We watched maybe approximately like 2 hours of it, and there were like 800 of us like watching it, and the chat SAR was just like out of control, and it was entertaining in its own right, and it was like humorous and stuff like that. But when I got to actually watch the game be played for like 2 hours, it was like I almost finally came to terms with the fact that despite my love for like Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 and 2, Bloodborne might not be the kind of game that I actually want to play.
Yeah.
And it was in that game's, I mean, granted the game's being streamed ahead of time, it's not even like officially out yet and stuff like that, and so the stream did officially get banned, but I guess what I'm getting at was before I watched that 2 to 3 hours of gameplay of that person just running through it, like, From Software and Sony had my $60. Mm-hmm. And it was after I had the chance to kind of watch that game be played, outside of developer commentaries and marketing materials and stuff like that, that I was finally able to, not a hands-on impression of it whatsoever. Obviously, it was purely eyes-on, and the person playing it wasn't even that great at it. But it was just interesting how that was, like, it was Twitch that was the tipping point, and how Twitch can be used for, kind of launching, like doubling or tripling or quadrupling like a game's success. But in this one instance, in me, it kind of went from them, like they were going to get my money and now they're probably not. And like I felt bad that up until last night I was totally, kind of like talking up, like 30 and nerdy, we're going to start like, streaming this game come Tuesday and stuff like that. And then I got to the point where I was like, I don't know if I want to spend $60 on this. Like we're a very small online thing. We're not at the point where like Sony's like, here's this game, talk about it and play it and review it and stuff like that.
We're not getting advanced copies of anything.
Yeah. It's like every dollar that we scrape together to keep this thing going has got to go somewhere, and I'm just not sure I can put it into a game that I just don't think I'm going to enjoy.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with Chappie. I was so excited to see it. I was sold by the trailer, even though I had a few reservations about it. I was like, and even though I really didn't like Elysium,
mm-hmm.
and I have my issues with District 9, but, I feel like Neil Blomkamp is a unique mind, or at least a competent hand at cinema, and he understands sci-fi, and even though I didn't like Elysium, it was a good effort, and District 9, again, great efforts, good ideas, he'll get better. And then the first mention of Chappie in a review was so negative. It wasn't even like, oh, this is disappointing, or oh, this is not as good as Elysium, and Elysium was bad. It was, this is terrible. Like, without context, without qualification, this is a garbage movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if Bloodborne is going to be garbage, but
oh yeah, no. I'll go more on that in a minute.
Yeah, the trailer for Bloodborne at no point interested me.
Okay.
I haven't played Demon's Souls, but I watched it played. I've played 15 hours or so of Dark Souls 1, and I got really, 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 really stuck. But I was loving every second of it.
Mm-hmm.
Dark Souls 2 was sort of disenchanting, and so I was going into the Bloodborne trailer with a little bit of reservations, with a few reservations.
Yeah.
And it didn't impress me. It just, it's a change of scenery, but I don't know what else the game introduces. I don't know why I would want to play Bloodborne instead of Dark Souls again.
Right. So like for me, like my introduction to Demon's Souls was just shortly after it started kind of like blowing up. Like I jumped on that train like early, just like, oh, a game that presents you with challenge and this this dark world, and more than anything, a sense of reward and accomplishment you feel from actually, like downing these towering bosses and like surviving this world full of like booby traps and stuff like that. And I loved how it was this social experience of, watching the shadow of somebody who went through an area before you, like dying, and then like learning from their mistakes, and the multiplayer component, like pretty much everything. Like Demon's Souls is the game that I have like 120 hours into, and close to that for like Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2 and stuff like that. But one of the things that I loved about those games the most was that it said, like, here's this incredible, enchanting world to explore and trek through and try to, survive your way through and whatnot. And part of telling your own story in that world is creating your own character, whether you want to be like a magic caster that, wears robes, or, eventually a hulking warrior with a massive shield and a huge suit of armor, and it's like cumbersome, or you could play the rogue if you want, and that there were like pluses and minuses to every choice you decided in regards to how you were going to survive this world. And it looks like Bloodborne, and I didn't believe this at first. There were some people who I heard say, like, Bloodborne looks like Dark Souls, except they're forcing you to be a rogue. They're forcing you to wear no armor and be fast and kind of have to dodge and maneuver your ways around, enemies, versus being able to put your shield up in front of you and kind of like tiptoe your way through this world. And that's what I saw in the 3 hours was, it can't be a caster, and you can't be a knight in shining armor. You're gonna be a rogue, and you're gonna be fast, and it totally turned me off that it didn't look like you could really create. You couldn't really choose the way that you wanted to play the game. The game looked like it was stressful enough. Like it is, and I think I put this in the now loading, it is suffering from like really, as of right now, like really long load times in regards to like when you die, just like waiting.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, and
it's got a 3 gig opening day patch.
Yeah, close to a 3 gig day patch, and it just, I don't know, it's just kind of, it's already disappointing that there's no doubt like people are going to love this game for everything that it is, for as fast as it is, and how it's still like a brutal Souls-like experience and stuff like that. But I just can't get over, kind of like how you pointed out, like I'm not sure what's so different about it in regards to like the world and the presentation. It's just like everything's faster, and you have less armor.
And faster is not at all what I want out of a Dark Souls game. What I liked so much about Dark Souls was how slow and methodical it was. I had to approach each enemy with caution, and I had to remember how to beat that one particular enemy, because if I ever let my guard down, even if just for a second, it could take advantage of that, and then I have to either start over or go scramble for more gear. Like, every decision you made had consequence. You didn't go into battle lightly.
Exactly, and then within that, like you said, in learning each enemy and what they're capable of and stuff like that, it was even, like I kind of mentioned before, it was dynamic in like, are you going to cast magic at it from afar? Are you going to play the rogue who wants to be fast on his toes and not wear armor? And so when the hulking knight like swings a sword down at you, you're actually going to dodge in that little space in between like his armpit and where like his legs are, and come up behind him and slash him in the back? Or are you going to stand there with the shield and like take the hit and counterattack or like parry? And it's just like in Dark Souls, it seems like they've stripped away all of that choice and that like decision. And granted, there's a lot of different weapons in the game, and you can do different things with them. They transform, and there is actually a shield that you can get in the game, which I think is purposefully kind of crappy, at least the one that we saw on like the stream and stuff like that. But I guess more so, I've had to come to terms with the fact that this is going to be the first game in kind of like obviously it's not like the Souls series, but it sort of is like a spiritual successor. And like I don't know. It bums me out that I don't want it.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, me too. I mean, there aren't too many games like Dark Souls, and it's a hard game. I definitely appreciate that it's a hard game to make, and then it would be a really hard game to follow up. But one way or another, I kind of feel like it's rushed. I know it was a different development team that did Dark Souls 2, but Dark Souls 2 wasn't anywhere near as engaging as the first one. It felt like Dark Souls Light, or just like a pale imitation of itself.
It was, yeah. So I really loved it, but I recognize that it wasn't nearly as original as its predecessor. It was just kind of coasting along on all the achievements of the first one.
And I wonder if that's part of it. I mean, do you think do you think we should have? Do you think we needed a Dark Souls sequel? Do you think it went Demon Souls and then sort of perfected? And this is, I'm just speculating here, but like perfected with Dark Souls. Should it have ended there?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those people actually that, not to dodge your question, but a little bit. Like, I recognize that Dark Souls is in many ways a superior experience to Demon Souls, but like Demon Souls is still, just in regards to like world design and structure and stuff like that, a superior game to Dark Souls. Yeah, and it looks like they tried to bring back a lot of the elements of, having like a hub world and stuff like that, more so like they did in Demon Souls. Like they brought that kind of stuff back into like Bloodborne, and in Bloodborne there's more like booby traps, and like the enemy placement is more haunted house, and it's like kind of like, aha, I was hiding behind here, and like now I've hit you, and there's a lot of that in like Demon Souls, and despite all of the Demon Souls elements that they brought back for Bloodborne, it's still, I don't know, it doesn't entice me. To answer your question, though, do we need Dark Souls 2? As gamers, no, I don't think that we needed Dark Souls 2, but obviously Bandai Namco or whoever's in charge of like the financials there said, like, why would we not do it,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, in the end, it ended up being, pun intended, a little bit soulless, haha, compared to Dark Souls. But and it almost looks like, see, and that's kind of, sorry, not to blab on too much. Like in regards to being afraid of like spending $60 on a game and just kind of falling a victim to like a very well made, ad campaign and stuff like that. Kind of like you were saying, how Bloodborne doesn't necessarily look like it's been that polished and that it could use more time in like certain regards and stuff like that. And I almost feel like, for as great of a partner as I'm sure From Software will say like Sony is in regards to getting games published and stuff like that, it almost seems like, yeah, like Sony's, scrambling, and they need this game out there right now. And their last two games, like The Order and Drive Club, have been like duds for various reasons and various opinions and stuff like that. And I'm just in the mindset that if you're releasing a 3 gigabyte day one patch, then you obviously released, put your game into production, said it was quote unquote gold long before like it should have had. And like imagine what this game could be if they could work on it for another, 6 months or so. It's not going to change the fact that the gameplay doesn't look as enticing as I thought it was going to at first, but from a polished standpoint, like maybe they could get those load times down to like 15 seconds, and then somebody who's kind of on the fence like I am could look at it like, well, maybe I will give it a shot, just, I don't know. They hurt themselves in the end, unfortunately. Or will, potentially.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense to me. The load times is critical. I remember playing Fable and going back and forth between the different worlds on the Xbox, and you'd have 30-second load times between worlds, and you could continue action between those worlds sometimes, and so, you'd be in the middle of a movement or a thought or an idea, you're not just passing through a gate, and then you'd completely lose that while you were waiting for it to load. I mean, I've hated load times since the PlayStation came out. It was one of the reasons I didn't get a PlayStation for a really long time, because I was like, why would I ever do that on all of my cartridge games? There's no such thing as a load time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in a game like Dark Souls, where dying is a significant part of the game, and restarting, to have to wait that long in between deaths, then it ruins the consistency of gameplay and makes you not want to take the chances that would result in a death. And so it pushes you farther away from the experience of the game.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like you would have thought that. It almost seems like the case of like, okay, we got the PS4 and it's like powerful, so all of our textures can be super HD, resi, and glossy, and the world can be huge and gothic, and we can visually bring it to life like never before. And in trying to achieve all of that, they pushed that. Not like optimization can come with time, but it's like they didn't plan around very basic things like getting back into the game after you die, which like dying and learning and repeating that process over and over again is like core to that gameplay experience, for better or worse, and it was so it'd be. You think that like load times and things like that would be one of the first things they would have like figured out in regards to their development and whatnot.
Yeah, and so many games have gotten better with it over the last 5 or 6, maybe even 10 years. Load times have really diminished, and it's become less of an issue. And could you imagine a game like Geometry Wars if you had a 30-second load time between deaths?
Right.
it'd be unplayable.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the first time, this is totally side thought, the first time I ever played Halo on the original Xbox, and the idea of going from place to place to place within that game world, and the load times taking like no longer than a second at most, or like maybe like the game would hiccup for a second, and it was like, okay, it loaded, like that was, it was like, woohoo, we're reaching, cartridge like points of, like keeping the world together and like stitched together in that regard. And it almost seems like since those days of the original Xbox and definitely SNES and PlayStation and N64 and stuff like that, we've taken so many steps like backwards. I just feel like what's acceptable in regards to releasing games on like PC on platforms like good old games in Steam and stuff like that. It's like the same things aren't as acceptable on consoles, except that consoles are, in regards to their development, being released in, you know what I'm saying? It's like they're being released in states that like PC gamers have been used to for years and years and years and years. And maybe I'm just like not with the times, but it's just like it pisses me off like how sloppy like the states of like games have become in regards to their, the way they perform on day one and whatnot.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I don't know. There was a really large portion of the early 2000s where I wasn't a PC gamer, and so I don't know. It was specifically around Steam, and so when games became downloadable and when the internet became a significant force of the PC gaming world, not just for online play, but for interaction with the game itself. And I don't ever remember hearing, though, about day one patches for PC games. I'm sure there were some, but like...
Oh, okay, so you're saying even that's changed.
I think so. I think the internet has spoiled them. Before the internet, you couldn't release a game that needed a 3 gig day one patch because there was no way to get it to the gamer.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's only now, and even during the early days of the internet when you weren't connected via broadband all the time, when you had to dial up on your 56K modem, a giant patch day one was unacceptable because not everybody had the internet. It would take too long to download, and you would need to utilize a piece of your house that was needed elsewhere. And
right.
So in some ways, it sounds like the internet has made them slightly more sloppy, and in some ways, also patches are really great.
Because they can be.
Games did used to release with bugs. No matter how good of a programmer you are, something would glitch, and previously there was no way to get that fixed to them. You just released a glitchy game, and you were screwed, and you would either lose your reputation or you'd get lucky and nobody would notice, or any number of factors or any number of results that were possible. But now it feels like they're using the internet as this crutch, like, oh, we want to hit this deadline, we don't have this material done with, we'll put it in the day one patch. And that's a business decision, not an artistic one.
Right.
And I don't even understand why it's a business decision, because last year it was clearly obnoxious, and there were Reddit threads all over the place saying, don't pre-order games because they don't deserve our money ahead of time. Wait until the game is released, and if it's a glitchy piece of crap, don't buy it. And so it's become a serious issue, and maybe Bloodborne is still a holdover from last year, and maybe it was too late to turn that ship around for them. But The Witcher's been delayed. Witcher 3 has been delayed repeatedly because they don't want to release a glitchy game. So I don't think it's impossible for Bloodborne to be delayed, but then I guess that makes your point even more relevant. Sony's last 2 releases were duds. So Bloodborne is an almost sure win, so maybe they are just pushing it out the door. It's hard to say.
I think it'll succeed overall. Like, I foresee this being a game that will sell consoles to people in love with the Soul series who are primarily Xbox gamers and stuff like that. Like, I think it's going to do just fine. I just don't. I don't know. I guess it bugs me that it almost feels like they're pushing it out the door when it never really had the potential to be that big of a system seller anyways. You know what I mean? It's not like they're launching like a new Mario game or something like that, or it's not like this is, Zelda, or I'm trying to think of what big, like a good example of like a big name brand IP that so it's not God of War 4,
Yeah. It's not Uncharted.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, duh. It's not Last of Us 2 will probably be a system seller in its own regard, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
In other words, they're squandering its potential.
Yeah.
But like you said also, okay, we live in the internet age. They can patch it. It'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. Yeah, just a bunch of mixed thoughts on that ultimately, I guess, not to beat a dead horse about it, but yeah, there was a big part of me that after watching that footage and stuff like that, it was like I had one of those nights where I swear half my brain was sleeping and half my brain was just like analyzing the footage and how I felt about it. And there was a really big part of me that instead of spending $60 on Bloodborne, to satisfy that action adventure crave, just wants to buy, Bayonetta 2 on the Wii U, a game that's already out and critically acclaimed across the board and stuff like that. Spend $50 to get those two games and then spend the final $10 to download Planescape Torment on Good Old Games just to play a top-down isometric RPG with phenomenal storytelling and writing and everything that I didn't get out of Dragon Age.
Yeah. I'm a really big fan of these smaller games. I was going through my Steam catalog the other day, and I realized I have nothing. I have only a few large games, and everything else is some independent, weird, bizarre corner of the market thing that I enjoy so much more. And not that there aren't AAA games that I don't like, but they are few and far between. And I'm not interested in the next Call of Duty. I'm not even interested in Bloodborne, which is in a series of games that I did like.
Right.
What I like about this though is that it introduces a significant amount of competition and a significant and quite a few options. So if you don't want to play Call of Duty, or if you don't want to play the next Madden, or whatever EA's next sport game is, or any of the other long lines of IPs and series, and overly costly and graphics heavy but contentless games, you have alternatives. And so now it seems like we can say, instead of getting excited about Demon Souls and then Dark Souls and being only slightly let down by Dark Souls 2, and then not being interested in Bloodborne, we don't have to say, well, I have to get it because it's the only game that's coming out, and I need to spend this money to take this chance. You can say, nope, my $60 is going somewhere else.
Yeah, I hear you.
And they now have to fight for your dollar. It's better for you to have that sort of influence.
Yeah, I think, speaking of all that, too, I think that's one of the things that was really kind of exciting about that game also was, I get excited, for the website and, as a gamer and whatnot, kind of like we talked about in the past, when you can be current on something, when you can be playing it at the same time as everybody else and then involved in the conversation and whatnot. And so here it was like Bloodborne. It's like, this is the game that will probably have some longevity to it because of, the randomly generated dungeon section of the game and whatnot. And so I looked at it as a game that we could be social with, that we could stream with, that we could, preview and review and do videos for, and photo galleries for the website. And then I said, and on top of it all, it's part of the Souls series. How awesome! Well, you know what I mean in that regards. It has the DNA, and so it's going to be great. And that's the other part. That's the other reason why it's kind of heartbreaking. Is that I would have gotten so much out of it on so many levels, as a producer of content and a gamer, and a fan of Miyazaki's work and stuff like that. And now I'm not even sure if it's going to happen.
So it goes. There are plenty of other games to play.
There are, and that's why sometimes it's hard to balance that idea of having a website and a blog and stuff like that, and feeling that it's really good to be current and be in the conversation and stuff like that, and having to balance that with sometimes it doesn't matter because there are a lot of other people out there who are excited to read articles and consume content based on stuff that you're just discovering for the first time. If we wrote a Shadow of the Colossus article and stuff like that, there would be people out there to read it.
Yeah.
So, first world gamer problems, as I often tell Gina. We'll go for walks around the park and stuff like that, and I'll just kind of rant about this kind of stuff. Where to put the $60 and where we're going to get out of it. And I realize how petty it sounds that that's the kind of crap that we worry about, but at the same time, it's just our hobby is our passion. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So anything else? That's Bloodborne. That's where we stand on it.
Yeah.
Who knows? It might appear on Tuesday. I'm still super on the fence on it. All that stuff might still happen, but right now I'm thinking, there's other games I want to play. I could probably, I could buy 6 amazing critically acclaimed $10 games for the same price as something I'm not so sure is going to turn out the way I wanted it to, and that's just like a really scary decision to have to make.
Yep.
So we've almost been talking for 3 hours again, but you know what? That's okay. I started listening to and I forget if I mentioned this before. GiantBomb.com and the Giant Bombcast.
I know of it.
Yeah, I just plugged them on accident, but I listen to their podcast from time to time, and their main podcast is on average 3 hours long, and they talk about games, but they talk about other stuff that they're just kind of like doing in life and stuff like that also. And it made me feel like from the get-go, before I kind of knew that they existed, when you and I would end up with like a 2 or 3 hour podcast and feel really guilty about it, they kind of reaffirmed that there are people who will listen.
There are people willing to listen to it.
Yeah, or skim through it and find the chunks that they want,
Sure.
Yeah, so now we're okay. But yeah, those guys do a really great podcast also.
Cool. I'll have to check it out sometime. I have plenty of podcasts waiting for me, but every now and then it's good to pick out some new stuff.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So, all right, there's I think we hit everything on the list except for if there's anything about New Mexico that you want to talk about. It's just the bottom of the list. Travel, New Mexico.
Yeah. Boy, I don't know what I would say about it right now.
Is it still all wintry over there? Is it still snowy and stuff, or is it all melted?
It's bright and sunny. Well, it's always bright and sunny, but it's warming up. It was a weird winter. It snowed, and then the snow would melt, and then it would snow, and then the snow would melt. So.
Oh, okay.
It didn't stick around like it does sometimes or usually. Skiing was kind of bad, I think, this year for the people who are really into skiing. But yeah, now it's actually warming up. It's starting to feel like spring. So I'm going to go buy a bike tomorrow so I can bike around this place instead of drive, because it's a rewarding place to bike around.
I have a really ignorant question for you, but it's because I am ignorant on this subject, and that is, does New Mexico or like the major cities out there, is there actually like a meth problem or anything like that Breaking Bad would have been based off of in any shape, way, or form, or is it just like, their cities are any other cities and they have drug problems and all sorts of other stuff going on, no better or worse than any other place?
No, it's actually a really big problem.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
That's the reason, I think that's why they chose Albuquerque's. It is a very substantial problem out here. Substance abuse in general. There are a lot of Native American reservations out here. Those are notorious for having issues with alcohol and various drugs. Albuquerque does have a really big, I don't know if it's a meth industry, if you would call it that, but it is a popular drug down there, and they do have to monitor it and combat it as much as possible.
Wow.
Alcohol abuse in particular. There are two statistics, and I'm not bragging. These are not things to brag about. But I think, if I remember correctly, it was New Mexico has the second or third most number of drunk driving related fatalities in the United States, and also the either, again, 2 or 3, the second or third worst rate for that condition where a child is born as a result of, or not, is not born as a result of, but is born damaged by alcoholism.
Oh, wow.
I forget what that's called. Yeah, it's also the third poorest state in the country. Although maybe that's changing because of the film industry. Film industry is making a very large impact out here. It's the largest jobs creation force since the Manhattan Project was housed out here.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it's a really big deal out here. So maybe that's going to help a bit. But, yeah, substance abuse, meth in particular, and alcohol are big issues.
Well, okay.
Yeah. It's not like necessarily visible. Maybe more so in Albuquerque. I don't spend much time down there. But in Santa Fe, it's not like I walk around and I think, oh, that's a meth house, that's a meth house. Santa Fe is very pretty. And Albuquerque is too, for the most part. But I guess, I only visit the parts that are pretty. So,
yeah.
Yeah,
looking to stumble upon a meth house.
Yeah, I do have a friend who lives in Albuquerque, and she said that she watched a few episodes of Breaking Bad, and she was having a hard time doing it because she recognized so many places where they shot, and she was like, "Yep, that place is a problem."
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, all right. New Mexico.
There it is.
There it is.
It has a lot to offer other than that, though. It is pretty great.
Oh, I know, yeah. I've driven through it either a couple or a few times now, just like the state in general. Yeah, we actually stopped in Albuquerque, I think, on one of our road trips and stuff like that. Just every time I end up there in a car and whatnot, I'm just, I don't know, aghast at how beautiful it is, if that's the right word.
No, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, well, I mean, anything else in regards to anything that we talked about or didn't talk about, or final thoughts on anything?
I think anything else can wait for another podcast.
Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me. It's good to be back.
Yeah. Thanks to have you back. Thanks. Nice to, you know what I mean.
We've been talking too long. We're not making sense anymore.
I know, yeah, and then I'm going to go back. I already know. Like, if I ever, when I'm editing this, I'm going to go back and scrub to that part where you asked me to talk about Better Call Saul, and I'm just going to be like, I sound like an idiot. What the heck? Like, it's hard to walk that line of wanting to blab about how great something is and just wanting people to, just wanting to be able to say, it's good. Go watch it, enjoy it, experience it, and then we'll talk about it later. Like, that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, struggling with that in True Detective as well.
Yeah, and I know you were struggling with it in regards to Jupiter Ascending. I could tell you just.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so.
What you need.
All right, that's gonna be this podcast. This we don't have a name for what we've just done. We didn't chapter it. We didn't number it. Are we gonna call this like a now loading podcast?
Yeah, why not?
All right. Well, this was now loading podcast number 1.
Sure.
All right, cool. Separate from the now loading articles, which you can find on 30andnerdy.com, written by Scott and myself. So for 30andnerdy.com, again, I am Matt Sternett. You can reach myself and Gina on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at 30andnerdy or /30andnerdy, wherever it applies. 30 is spelled out. And across from me, I had the pleasure of speaking with...
I'm Scott William Hannon. You can find me at SWHannon, Hannan, at Twitter and on Instagram and on Facebook. And, well, nobody really uses LO, and neither do I, but I'm on there.
Are you? I was going to ask you, because on Facebook all the time, I'll see a lot of the pictures that you post. It's just like Santa Fe stuff or interiors, exteriors, just like anything that you post pictures of and whatnot. Do you post those on your Instagram and stuff like that also, or?
Most of those come through my Instagram account.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just have it set up to post to Facebook.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, and if it's ever perfectly square, the way an Instagram photo is, that's an Instagram photo. Otherwise, I take the full 16:9 aspect ratio picture.
Do you have an awesome camera on your phone that takes some of those pictures? Because some of the lighting on them is really nice and everything.
Yeah, actually, everything I put up through Instagram is through my phone.
Huh.
Yeah, it's a great camera. The Galaxy Note 3 has a great camera on it. It's a little slow at times, but it takes really solid pictures.
Oh, nice, cool. Okay, well, I think that's about it.
Yep.
Awesome, thanks, Scott.
Take care, man.
We'll see you. Or I'll hear you. I'll read your writing. All right, I'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye.